three keynote speakers to kick us off. I'm excited to introduce them. But we have on deck over a dozen advocates that are also supporting these speakers to help move these legislations and move these ideas across the finish line. In some instances, you'll hear from the legislators and from the advocates today. And so I encourage you all to participate in the Q&A and throughout the day as much as you can. You'll see here the lineup of speakers that we have on the screen. We're going to get kickstart. We're going to start things off with three keynote speakers, as I said, and then we're going to move into our legislator presentations. After which we'll dive in. We'll do a deep dive into nuclear in Maryland to top off today. This is day one of a two-day program. Today is mostly focused on climate and environment, climate legislation. But if you want to see what we have in store for tomorrow, because we encourage you to come back tomorrow as well, you can scan the QR code on your screen here and get the full agenda. Before we get started, I want to introduce to you the format for today's program. As presenters are speaking, you'll see a slideshow with information about the proposed legislation or topic that's being talked about. Today's program is being recorded, as you just heard, and it will be available within a week after the program on the Maryland Legislative Coalition's website. Closed captioning is provided, and so if you need to use that feature, you can go ahead and at the bottom of your screen, you can click the CC button, and so you can get the closed captioning there. We also want to hear from the audience during today. We'll have several polls that will pop up throughout this program. We ask you to please participate in those. And we'll also have the Q&A function open for the audience to ask questions. This program is really meant to be interactive, so we encourage you all to put as many questions as you have in the box. And if we can answer them live, we will. If not, we'll get to them in the Q&A feature by either the speaker or the advocate to help answer those. The Q&A feature, throughout the presentation, I encourage all the advocates who are on with us today to put information about the bills that you're working on or links to information on how people can get involved in the chat so that we can foster the community support for this legislation that we need. And lastly, we'll be taking a little break. We'll be taking a little break this afternoon. So new for us this year is to toss in a midway break. So at about 3 o'clock, we'll break for everyone to get a 5-minute break from their screens and to freshen up and get back into it. So I want to give one more thank you to the sponsors and the organizing committee for today's program. That includes the Climate Justice Wing of the Maryland Legislative Coalition, the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club, Shore Rivers, and the Mizrahi Family Charitable Trust. I'm truly honored to work with these persistent and ambitious group of people who have worked so hard to achieve this program today. And you'll see over the dozens of speakers that we have that it really is a high quality program that we're bringing to you today. So it's no surprise if you're on this. This coming Wednesday starts the Maryland General Assembly's legislative session. And like every session, there'll be ups and downs, there'll be twists and turns. But for me, what I see is setting the stage for this session in terms of the themes or the stressors or what's going to impact legislation, how it moves. We've got an election year coming up. So we'll for sure see some cautious moves by the administration and some legislators because of the uncertainty of what might happen after the election. We're also still in a budget deficit here in Maryland. Now, it's not the nearly $4 billion budget deficit that we dealt with last year, but it is still over $1 billion. And so that will certainly play into how bills are going to move, depending on the cost and the fiscal note attached to them. And also, urgency is rising. The theme of our presentation today is really hitting on the climate impacts that are happening right here in Maryland. Having a rain settling in the background is kind of fitting for today's talk because we're no stranger to extreme weather here in Maryland and the impacts that it has. And so we're going to hear a lot about data centers and how those are being used as a major topic for AI and other technology needs. We're also going to hear a lot today about utility rates and the overall grid infrastructure and what does bringing on data centers going to do to our infrastructure. Energy is also a big topic, and we'll be hearing from the Maryland Energy Administration as well as talking about nuclear energy today. And so it's a really, really good program that we have with many topics that we're excited to cover. And so buckle up, grab your notepad because there's going to be a lot of great notes for you to take down. Grab your favorite beverage and don't forget snacks too because we're going to be here for a while. But let's go ahead and dig in. And so it's my honor to welcome our first keynote speaker today, Brooke Lehrman. Brooke is the Maryland's 34th comptroller and the first woman to be independently elected to one of the state's constitutional offices. an attorney, former civil rights and disability rights lawyer, and 8-year member of the House of Delegates representing Baltimore City. Fun fact about Comptroller Learman is that she began her public service as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer working with children in public housing, bringing a lifelong commitment to equity and opportunity to her leadership. So, Comptroller Learman, I'm so excited to have you here today, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt, and a huge thank you to all of the organizers who pulled this together. An incredible number of Marylanders from around the state are joining, as I see. So thank you to all of you for taking some time on a busy Saturday afternoon to join us and to be informed, be organized, and to keep moving our state forward. Looking at this participant list, I see climate leaders, environmental advocates, community organizers, legislators, people who understand the urgency of the moment that we are in. Climate change is not some distant threat, right? It is happening now. And it takes all of us working together to meet this moment and to meet the challenge. So when I first took office, I was elected in 2022 and was sworn in just about 3 years ago. When I took office, we set a new vision for our agency to work in partnership to create a Maryland that is more equitable, more resilient, and more prosperous, where every single person can reach their full potential. And we simply cannot achieve that vision unless we confront the challenges that climate change bring us head on. So here's what we need to understand, and I know that you all do. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, right? It's a justice issue, it's a health crisis, and fundamentally, it's also an economic issue. And I say that speaking as the state's elected CFO, right? We are already paying the price for climate change. Right here in Maryland, we have faced 85 extreme weather events since 1980, which has caused nearly $20 billion in damages. So in May of 2025, Maryland experienced the devastating physical and fiscal effects of extreme weather when floods ravaged areas in Mountain Maryland and Allegheny and Washington counties. This extreme weather, it means roads and homes destroyed, power grids knocked out, sewer systems failing. Low-income communities and communities of color often bear the brunt of these disasters, right? They struggle to recover and don't have adequate resources. On Earth Day of last year, 2025, our office put a stake in the ground. We said we need to make sure that people understand that this is an economic issue. And so we released a climate change cost report as part of our state spending series to explain state expenses and share lessons learned from across the US about cost drivers of critical infrastructure and other public goods projects that are essential to resilient growth. Well, this report, it outlined the categories and the types of costs associated with climate change, examining the costs of both action and inaction and the impacts. So, yes, there is a cost to addressing climate change, right? Our report found that protecting Maryland from chronic coastal flooding alone will probably cost an estimated, $27 billion by 2040. However, doing nothing will cost more. And the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. That's why I'm so pleased that we are now moving forward on our costs of climate change study, outlined by the Renew Act passed by the General Assembly, spearheaded by Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, Senator Katie Frey Hester. And I'm so pleased to have worked with the governor's office and you all to make sure that we are moving forward on this report. And I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who stepped up, who didn't let up to say this report is essential. It will give lawmakers critical information on the costs associated with the impacts of climate change and will provide our Attorney General essential information and data as well. By quantifying the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on our communities, this study will build a roadmap for financial resilience in Maryland amid the challenges of climate change. But we know that this is a study that many people have to give input to for it to be correct. That's why we're coordinating an interagency work group to support the study to ensure that all partner agencies are at the table and that this study meets the criteria outlined in the legislation. By investing today in a sustainability and in climate resilience, we are investing in our health and in our future. By centering people in these conversations, we're making it clear that climate change, it's not abstract, right? This is a deeply personal issue. It affects our families, it affects our neighbors, and it affects our kids and their futures. I am so grateful to live in Maryland, a state where our governor and our General Assembly and all of you live and understand the importance of confronting climate risks with clarity, courage, and accountability. Thank you for all of your advocacy. Thank you for your efforts to make Maryland a more resilient state for all of us. Because, as I often say, we all do better when we all do better. I am proud to be your partner. I am so proud to have created the Office of Climate Resilience Director. I know Kim Pezza, our first director, is on with us. I'm proud to have a climate advisory council made up of many of you to advise us and to spread our message around. And I'm excited to work in partnership with you and other agencies to make sure that we publish this essential cost of climate change report. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." I just like to add, and are willing to work to make those dreams a reality. You all are showing up and ready to work, and for that, I am so grateful and excited to continue being your partner. Onwards, thank you, and have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much, Comptroller. Really, really appreciate the great remarks and high encouragement. How can people who want to get involved, how can they get in touch with your office?
Thank you. So in the chat, I have put a link to our website. We have a brand new agency website, marylandcomptroller.gov. If you go to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a Stay Informed link. You can join our new newsletter list and get newsletters sent to you monthly about information. You can also email Kim Pezza or me. Our emails are in that chat as well, and let us know that you'd like to stay updated. Thank you again, Shore Rivers and Cecilia and everybody, Sierra Club, every LCV, everybody who organized this amazing, Lori and everybody who organized this amazing event. I look forward to continuing to work with you all.
Thank you so much. We look forward to working with you as well.
Thanks.
Awesome. Okay. Moving over, I want to do a quick tech check. Can folks see my screen here as I slide to our next speakers for the keynote, Emily Scarr and Laura Peltier? We're going to go ahead and keep moving. And if I get word that we can't see the screen, then we'll go ahead and fix that. But as I introduce our speakers, Emily Scarr, I think, Emily, you've been participating in this just as long as I have, if not longer, for all 7 years. But it's really great to have you back. Emily is a senior advisor with Maryland PIRG, where she provides campaign strategy, communications, and policy leadership while spearheading the organization's energy and utility work. Since joining in 2013, she has led winning coalitions to strengthen democracy, protect public health, curb toxic chemicals, including PFAS, and advance clean, affordable, and consumer-friendly energy policies for Marylanders. Joining Emily is Laurel Petier. Laurel is the founder of Retail Energy Revealed, an organization dedicated to giving consumers clear, factual information about deregulated energy markets. She also serves as the chair of the Maryland Energy Advocates Coalition, where she has pushed for meaningful reforms to Maryland's residential retail energy market to better protect and empower consumers. Since 2014, Laurel has worked directly with thousands of limited income families in utility crisis, helping BGE customers manage and stabilize their energy bills. I'm really excited to learn from both of you today here, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily and Laurel.
Good afternoon. I'm Laurel Peltier, and I'm going to share what's been happening on consumer utility bills to help set the stage for this conference. And then I'm going to hand it off to Emily Scarr, who will explain the whys. Next slide, please. We're going to start with the basics just to make sure we're all on the same page. Your utility bill combines two primary components, delivery and supply charges. Delivery rates are how much your regulated utility charges your account to be hooked up to their energy utility. Delivery, the same as the distribution fee, pays for utility infrastructure like poles, wires, and pipes. Supply rates cover the cost of electricity or the gas commodity based on how much your home or apartment used that month. Supply also pays to cover the cost of electric transmission lines. For most Marylanders, delivery rates and supply costs both increased in 25 and will again in 26, leaving Maryland families from all income levels paying a lot more, as I'll show you. Here's what's happened with both delivery and supply rates. Next slide. Let's start with delivery charges. Gas and electric utilities distribute energy to Maryland homes under a state-granted monopoly. Because these monopolies have no competition, utilities rates are approved by the state's regulatory body called the Public Service Commission. We all call it the PSC. Since BG&E was acquired by Exelon in 2012, gas delivery charges have more than tripled, about 3 times the rate of inflation. Under the 2013 STRIDE legislation, BG&E and Columbia Gas both hit stride hard and have averaged over 8% yearly gas delivery increases. They've spent and will continue to spend billions of ratepayer funds replacing old pipes. BG&E gas customers now pay about $2 in gas delivery charges for every dollar they spend on the gas itself. BG&E gas delivery rates are going up again in January 1st and also on February 1st to cover for 2023 cost overruns. Washington Gas customers have been paying about half as much for gas delivery than BG&E customers, but that could soon change as WGL just proposed an $83 million rate increase. Next slide. An interesting thing that happened this past decade is that many BG&E gas customers didn't notice the gas delivery rate increases because their gas supply rates plummeted at the same time that their gas delivery rates were increasing. Cheap frac gas starting around 2009 translated into cheap electricity supply. The consumer gas savings masked the constant uptick of BG&E gas delivery rates. Next slide. In addition to gas rates climbing, the gas delivery rates, electric delivery rates are also going up. In 2012, again, Exelon purchased 3 Maryland utilities, BG&E, Pepco, and Delmarva, and Exelon now services 83% of Maryland's 2.3 million residential accounts. These utilities have increased delivery rates for gas and electricity at a rate far outpacing inflation. BG&E's electric delivery rate has doubled since 2010. It's about twice the inflation. And both Pepco and Delmarva electricity delivery rates increases are even higher. And pennies matter in home energy, as you'll see later. On top of everything, an unexpected and painful rate. Let me make sure I got this right. Go to the next slide. On top of everything, an unexpected and painful rate pressure has spiked PJM competitive markets electricity supply. Emily will outline our current data center phenomenon, but like the Fifth Dimension song, for consumers and businesses, electricity supply rates have also gone up, and away. Electricity supply has climbed every year since 2019. And again, Emily's going to dive into the details of why. But just to give you an idea, because I think everybody on this webinar is feeling it. In 2019, the average SOS, your electricity cost per kilowatt hour, was 7 cents. And in 2026, it will hover around 17 cents. That is just supply. And as Emily will explain, PJM electricity supply rates aren't expected to fall in the near term. Gas supply rates also went up a little bit in 2025. And other than the Ukraine 2022 spike, gas commodity rates have been relatively steady. So the next slide. So what does all this mean for the average customer? Here's a pretty close Maryland residential average yearly bill today. I used gas as the heat source, but an electricity heated home can often look even worse than this. And basically what's going on, if you look at the average 10,000 kilowatt hour using electricity and about 1,000 therms of gas with the new rates, it's around $4,000 a year, which is $333 a month. And if you compare that to like 2021, that is about it's about $125 a month. So sorry for the math error there. That was my fault because the difference between 333 and 210 is 125. But That is $1,500 for the average bill. And that is why everybody's pretty much freaking out about energy. I really want to highlight, since I do work primarily on low income, that the families getting pummeled right now are our state's limited income segment, which is 450,000 families. That's about a quarter of the state. And I want to put a little face to who this segment is. If you took the majority of each demographic and factor of low income, it makes a lot more sense why this group of Marylanders is struggling to keep their power on. This segment is mostly seniors who live alone on fixed incomes, about $1,500 a year, a month. 60% of them rent, and those rentals use almost a third more energy than non-low income apartments. And because 64% of these rentals were built before 1980, they often have outdated and inefficient heating. And our HVAC systems, our heaters, our air conditioners are the largest energy user in a house. And the top 10 areas, interestingly, are the rural areas with higher use of propane and oil and resistance heating. And Baltimore City's added to that list too. So energy burdens have radically climbed for low income, sitting around 14% of their income, and 6 is ideal. So next slide. So now that I've thoroughly bummed you out, I think a really good question to ask is, what can we do about it? And today and tomorrow, legislators will share their bills that they hope will help solve the rate crisis. But if there's any silver lining to this rate crisis, I am definitely seeing that consumers are now more engaged in energy and are willing to take actions that lower rates and usage. Reducing energy usage is a win for our environment by reducing greenhouse gases and also reducing our budgets. I'm going to fly through a few ideas and programs, and we have all a very big, comprehensive how to lower your utility bill. And I'm going to fly through it because it would honestly be about a 4-hour webinar. But my hope in the next few slides is just to inspire you to consider taking some steps to lower your bill, and also to share your time and talents within your community to get these real-world actions more widely known. These ideas are written in a 6-step guide, and everything is on PIRG's awesome toolkit. So the next slide. So you might find it interesting that the first step in getting a handle this is to actually know how much energy your home or rental uses. Is it too much? Is it too little? Or is it okay? And these two charts are very unusual because I worked with contractors to set out by the number of bedrooms your house or apartment has, what would be a normal level of energy use. And it's not perfect, but it just gives you an idea. Are you high, low, or okay? Because most people get e-bills, and trust me, I've helped thousands of people, and very few know their normal usage. It's mostly driven by your HVAC. So that is really the number one step for everyone in the state, is really understand your usage. It's on BG&E bills, and you can get it online, or you can call into your utility and look at it by year, because weather drastically changes your month-to-month usage. Next slide. Now, here's some ideas on how to actually change your rates. And I know everybody on this probably knows about off-site solar farms, but just in case, enroll in community solar. It takes 2 minutes, and this is an easy step. And it's also for renters and homeowners. Enroll and save. The best news is that community solar credits will be included on all utility bills in a few short weeks for a one bill option. Subscribing to an offsite solar farm nets at least a 10% savings off of most of your electricity. And it's even better. Limited income families can save 20 or even 25%. There are no tricky contracts or variable rates, and I've listed the open solar farms right now. But if you really want to double up on your green, because this is an environmental summit, you can buy Green E certified RECs through TerraPass. And this step would actually surpass what retail energy suppliers were offering. Each REC is $8. It's Green E certified, and it will cover 1,000 kilowatt hours of your usage. So for about $50, which can be paid out of about $200 of community solar savings, you will have maxed out on green energy if installing solar panels isn't an option at your house. Next slide. So this list is what you will normally see on how to save. And this is why we put it in the guide, because some of this is easy and some of this is hard. But what I want to tell you is that every single account holder in Maryland can get a free quick home energy checkup. It's very, very useful. It's 45 minutes and they come in. And did you know that also Empower funded our free HVAC tune-ups? That's for renters and for homeowners. Get to know your heater. Change out those air filters, ditch that old refrigerator in the garage. And I go into many homes these days that still have these old style non-programmable thermostats. We're finding many clients have also set them really high. So Department of Energy suggests 68 in the winter, 78 in the summer. This is just a brief idea of some of the simple steps. So now the next slide gets to the harder step. And I really encourage anybody who owns a home to please complete an Empower subsidized energy audit for $100. And by the way, this is free for limited income accounts because you would be using the Department of Community and Housing Services, DHCD. The audit, its findings and suggestions allow you to access Steep Empower funded discounts for insulation, HVAC, heat pumps, air sealing, and other products. This photo is at my house and it's the post blower door test. I have a classic Mid-Atlantic Baltimore brick leaky home that before the Empower work was at $9,400 in leakage and it went down to $5,900 and rebates paid for about 50% of the work that we had done. There is so much available in our state to lower energy usage, from electrification, adding solar panels, geothermal. And with today's high rates, people are a lot more interested. I've included some really cool utility cheat sheets on the toolkit. And also just if people call in, especially if you're a legislator, like, okay, if this person, this is what you would do. I wanted you to know I have an Instagram. It's called Energy Help Desk, and the guide is in the toolkit. So now you have a better feel for what consumers are experiencing, and Emily will now explain the key policies and factors and how and why Maryland got here and future steps. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I was trying to paste the toolkit, and I will. Hi, I'm Emily Scar. I'm a senior advisor with Maryland PIRG based in Baltimore. And I'm going to take some time to explain why bills have risen now that Laurel has done such a good job explaining where we're at. So first we're going to talk about delivery rates, and then we'll talk about supply, that as well. So delivery rates are tied directly to utility spending. The more utility spends, their larger opportunity they have to profit. Functionally, gas and electric utilities are responsible for maintaining the safety and reliability of the system to deliver energy to our homes through maintenance and repairs. They make their highest profits when they make capital investments, new pipes, new poles, new wires. For these projects, they're financed like a mortgage or a high-interest credit card. They pay for the cost up front with investor money. And if the PSC determines that spending is appropriate, it's paid back over a long period of time, decades even, including compounding interest and taxes. The rate and the amount of time varies, but to give you a ballpark, most recently, these rates have been around a 9% interest rate or annual return rate. This makes sense for some investments and is in fact why we turn to wealthy individuals to own our utilities in the first place in order to ensure we had enough capital to build an electrical grid that could serve everyone throughout the entire country in our rural communities. But it also creates a powerful incentive for wasteful spending, and that incentive to build is no longer lined up with public interest priorities the same way it was when we first established our utilities. So we rely on the legislature and the Public Service Commission to keep a careful watch in order to deter wasteful spending. So as you can see here, BG&E's profits have skyrocketed in the last decade, jumping from about $147 million in 2010 to $527 million in 2024. And the company is also on track to be even higher in 2025. BG&E's profits were relatively stable until 2012. I keep meaning to extend this chart further. And that's when Exelon bought BG&E. Pepco, you can go to the next slide, was taken over by Exelon in 2017, and profits then jumped from around 205 million in 2018 to 390 million in 2024. So, this is to combined BG&E and Pepco profits. I put those together. So I'm not suggesting that all the spending was wasteful, nor that utilities shouldn't have an opportunity to profit. But when profits spike in a certain way and our service doesn't improve or even gets worse, there's certainly a problem that we need to address. So you can go to the next slide. There are two public policy decisions that we believe have really driven the increase of delivery rates for customers. The first is the STRIDE Law of 2013, and the second is Multi-Year Rate Making Pilot, which launched in 2020. Both of these policies have exacerbated the utilities' incentive to overspend while also weakening critical safeguards to prevent wasteful spending. So, for example, one of the key drivers in BG&E's gas delivery rates tripling, as Laurel explained, and their profits increasing so much has been their gas pipeline replacement program known as Operation.
Do you want me to answer those questions?
Go on mute, Laurel. Where was I? That was Operation Pipeline, which is part of operates under the STRIDE Law. So the way that the STRIDE Law exacerbated this dynamic of incentivizing capital spending was it allowed gas utilities to charge customers for gas capital spending more quickly. And so it's incentivized increased spending without there being added requirements in law to ensure that the gas utilities were prioritizing safety or even operating in a cost-effective way. The law was passed in around 2013 under the banner of safety as a means to encourage the utilities to more quickly address the risk of our aging cast iron pipes, which we have pipes that are 80, 100 plus years old in Baltimore and the region around. However, they're already legally obligated to maintain the safety of the system. So Maryland PIRG's position has long been that any additional financial incentive was and continues to be unnecessary. They need to do their job, and if there's work that needs to be done to replace pipes, they have all the authority they need to do to make it happen. And so in December, Maryland PIRG Foundation released a report which analyzes BG&E's 2025 Operation Pipeline work. And our analysis found that the program is not properly prioritizing safety and could actually be slowing the work to repair or replace the riskiest pipes while driving up massive rate increases and utility profits and locking us into an expensive new gas system. You can go to the next slide. So as you can see from their project selection, of the 34 active projects in 2025, 97% were selected for pressure conversion reasons, and only 32% were selected based on risk scores, which is BG&E's internal process for assessing the likelihood of a gas main failure. So instead of just addressing the old cast iron pipes or the mains that are most risk at failure, because not all cast iron pipes are leaking or going to fail, they're converting sections of the system to higher pressure. This pressure conversion is more expensive, more time intensive, and more complicated. It involves not only replacing cast iron mains, but also the plastic service lines that go into individual homes and regulators neighborhood by neighborhood. So 85% of the gas mains they replaced in 2025 were cast iron, which leaves 15% that weren't. And their selection process suggests that many of those are not necessarily leaking nor necessarily requiring replacement instead of repair or relining. And more than 40% of the service lines replaced in 2025 were plastic. So they're replacing all of these mains, all these service lines and regulators without even considering options to repair, reline, or look at alternatives to gas pipelines entirely, like targeted electrification programs. And focusing on repair or replacement of just the riskiest pipes using leak detection technology, which they have, would not only be faster and cheaper, it would also make us safer than what we're doing now. So on the other hand, installing and paying for an entirely new higher pressure gas system might make sense if we had plans to keep using gas for the long term. but we don't. Again, we're speaking to an environmental audience here, so as you're well aware, we know we need to reduce our use of fossil fuels in our homes, including for home heating, to reduce both air pollution in and outside of our homes, and to help, bring down heating bills. Marylanders are increasingly already opting in to use electric heat pumps for heating and cooling because they are the most efficient option in to help bring down their bills. But even if we didn't plan to reduce the use of our gas, the way we are approaching this replacement is neither cost effective nor safety driven. So you can go to the next slide. The project has already been one of the biggest reasons we've seen our gas rates jump in BG&E territory. And if BG&E completes its total projected STRIDE work of $4 billion, it's going to cost customers $19.5 billion to pay back. And most of that difference is the profits to the company. Washington Gas is also undertaking a similar gas pipeline replacement program, but has so far been much slower to spend money. That's a big reason why Washington Gas customers pay half as much for gas delivery as we do in BG&E territory. But BG&E's results should serve as a stark warning, however, that we need to reform their program as well before more harm is done. And they did just put in that $82.5 million rate increase request. Next slide. So during the most recent legislative session, we made some great headway in adding consumer protections to the STRIDE law by passing the Ratepayer Protection Act as part of the Next Generation Energy Act. The changes we made include requiring gas pipeline spending to prioritize safety and be cost effective, including looking at non-pipeline alternatives. The ball is now in the PSC's court, both on Washington Gas's rate increase as well as the project list for BG&E and Washington Gas in 2026. The PSC is accepting comments on Washington Gas's project list right now. So if you're in Washington Gas territory, I suggest you get comments in by the end of the month. We hope they will have a similar process with BG&E to ensure that 2026 projects are in line with the new law. The Public Service Commission also took their own action in 2025. They ended the expensive utilities gas pipeline expansion incentive, known as line extension allowances, which allowed them to charge gas line expansion to new homes to their entire rate base. Once finalized, this decision will save Maryland gas customers more than $1 billion over the next 10 years. So that's a huge victory. So the next slide, I want to talk about multi-year rate plans, which have led to rapidly increasing electric delivery rates in a similar way as the STRIDE program has for gas. So every Exelon utility owned in the state, which is BG&E, Pepco, and Delmarva Power, have used this alternative form of rate making in the last 5 years. Until 2020, the way utilities rates were set was that utilities spent money to maintain the poles, wires, and pipes, and for our homes and businesses. And like any business, they recovered this cost and profits through charging their customers. But since, like other businesses, they do have a monopoly on the service with no competition, the state plays a role in approving how much they could charge their customers. And the aim is for them to set a rate that is based on the need to cover their cost and a reasonable profit. Generally speaking, it doesn't need to change that much year to year. Before 2020, if a utility ever wanted to increase rates, they would go to the PSC and have to make the case by showing receipts, the money spent, to justify that, no, our operating expenses have gone up in a substantial way that's not going to change, so we need to change our base rates. Some Maryland utilities rarely asked for rate increases, and the PSC would decide if that spending was reasonable and prudent and only then increase bills to recover the money that had already been spent. The money going out the door above what was being approved wasn't recovered. So investors were cautious with increased spending. It served as a natural disincentive against wasteful spending. In 2020, things changed when the Public Service Commission launched a pilot program for BG&E to request a multi-year rate hike. It's the reverse of the traditional process. So BG&E asked for approval for spending up front by showing plans and forecasts of increased spending. The PSC then decides how much of that increase to approve, and then it was phased in over 3 years of rate increases. This happened again in 2023. And despite being pre-approved, however, which lowers their financial risk, their profit margin stayed pretty much the same height. The system, we are concerned, encourages utilities to forecast massive spending, giving them more opportunity to profit, especially on these expensive capital projects. So we just finished the last year, 2026. This is our final year of BG&E's second multi-year rate increase. Things got even messier in the process, though, when BG&E actually overspent their projected spending and has returned to the PSC asking for more money. This is known as the reconciliation process, which is a win-win for shareholders and can be a lose-lose for customers. Well, the PSC can reject this overspending, and they actually did last month reject over half of what BG&E requested. The incentive to overspend and drive up rates is just really strong under this system. So since the PSC granted BG&E the first multi-year rate increase in 2020, rates have increased rapidly. Pepco and Delmarva Power, which like BG&E also subsidiaries of Exelon and got this 3-year multi-year rate increase in 2020, we've seen their rate increases have been at least 40% higher than what we saw in Maryland from 2006 all the way to 2020. But again, it's not all bad news. You can go to the next slide. Again, during the most recent legislative session, we made some headway in adding consumer protection to both of these policies. So in addition to the changes to gas pipeline spending I already outlined, the Next Generation Energy Act requires multi-year rate plan proposals to benefit the public and directs the Public Service Commission to end the reconciliation process for spending above projections. It also prevents utilities from charging ratepayers for trade associations and private jets. I don't think we have time, but I'll put in the chat, and that's what I pasted earlier by accident, links to these clips on Instagram of Delegate Charkoudian and Delegate Crosby talking about that progress we made, which was so exciting. And go to the next slide. So it's now up to our Public Service Commission to enforce these laws. We expect all of these policies to be put to the test in 2026. BG&E's final rate increase went into effect January 1st, as I said, so they may be coming back to the Public Service Commission in February or March to ask for another rate increase, whether it's a multi-year increase or a 1-year rate increase, we don't know. We are waiting for the PSC to release the results of their study of the pilot program. Pepco also proposed a rate increase last fall, and Washington Gas did just a couple weeks ago. And there are a number of public policy proposals this legislative session that could push for more utility accountability, which I think I'm going to talk about later today. Before I turn to supply costs, I will highlight that Maryland PIRGs spend most of our time focusing on this, stopping distribution rate increases, and that's for 2 reasons. Unlike supply rates, they are directly controlled by the state. And once they go up, they are much harder, if not impossible, to bring down. Supply rates do tend to fluctuate. And so while it's definitely painful when they go up, we can bring them down and they will come down in the mid to long term. If you have any questions on this, please hold them. Well, I don't know if probably won't have any time for questions, but I'm always happy to connect offline. So next slide, we can talk about supply costs. Laurel flagged this already, but gas supply costs rose about 24% last winter. Electric supply costs rose up to 25% for some customers in Maryland in 2025 and aren't expected to come down for at least a few years. But as I said, that while this is very alarming, supply rates can be volatile. And that's one of the reasons it's really important to keep distribution rates under control. So there is a little room for volatility. But because our distribution rates are already so high, that's why people are not being able to handle this increase in supply costs. You can go to the next slide. Electric supply costs are controlled by PJM, which is our regional grid operator. Their job is to manage our electrical transmission grid and which energy projects can connect to the grid, as well as managing a yearly auction to set the price of electricity. PJM should serve as a traffic cop to ensure the right balance of supply and demand so that electricity is both affordable and reliable. You can go to the next slide. PJM is controlled by its stakeholders. It's largely dominated by fossil fuel companies and electric utilities. While our electric utility bills are going up, these companies and utilities are reaping in massive profits for both the production of energy as well as the transmission of electricity and transmission lines. Maryland PIRG Foundation, as well as state agencies, consumer advocates, and a bipartisan group of state legislators and governors have been very critical of PJM, its governance structure, and its anti-consumer decisions that have driven up bills. So some of our top concerns have been that, first, PJM is making it too hard for cheaper, clean energy like solar-connected batteries to connect to the grid and bring down prices. Second, PJM has been setting rules that pad the profits of its utilities and fossil fuel companies at the expense of ratepayers. And third, PJM has not properly planned for nor assessed cost appropriately for projected increase in demand from data centers. So, compared to other grid managers, PJM has one of the longest timelines in the country for connecting to new clean energy projects. There's enough clean energy and battery storage projects to power 60 million homes awaiting approval at PJM. 98% of those projects awaiting approval are renewable energy projects. So fundamentally, this auction that's led to our really high prices has been flawed. In theory, the reason we would have an auction price that is so high is to signal to energy developers that they should propose projects to meet increased demand. However, if projects are already proposed to PJM and PJM's the reason they're not getting allowed to connect to the queue, there's something fundamentally wrong with this system, in that we are just rewarding our legacy power plants at the ratepayers' expense without sending those market signals we want to be sending, and just providing them with windfall profits. And so while we've been critical that PJM has stifled the connection of clean energy to the grid, PJM is also projecting a massive increase in demand due to data centers. I will flag that this is unclear if and how much this increase is being exaggerated. Maryland Electric customers are already seeing high rates because of this projected increase in demand and increased transmission costs for data centers out of state. So the idea that we need more energy is not based on current increased use in Maryland. In fact, we're projecting pretty stable use in the state for now from residential users. It's based on projected increases in the future or current increases from out-of-state data centers, but it's PJM, it's Baltimore, Maryland regions, including Pepco territory, that are in our small businesses that are bearing the cost of those new large users. In addition, Maryland customers are suffering from the bad auction results. There are a couple additional decisions at PJM on the supply side that have really hurt us in particular. The first is when Talen Energy announced its plan to close the coal-fired power plants at Brandon Shorge. PJM granted BG&E a no-bid contract to build a new transmission line to compensate for the lost power. The Office of the People's Counsel protested that proposal because it didn't undergo a competitive procurement process, nor did they consider other more cost-effective alternatives to the transmission, including putting like battery storage at the site. But FERC approved the project as PJM requested, and since BG&E's cost estimates have doubled. So they put in a bid at $800 million. It's already up to $1.5 billion, all of which we'll pay for. And one note there is often we'll hear from our utilities that they don't profit on supply rates, but if they own transmission, they do. And this is one of the examples of where they're seeing increased profits and increased bills for us to the utilities. The good news, of course, is that transmission line will be incredibly powerful. It's expected to bring in more power than was being produced at Brandon Shores. So we do have the plan in place for once that power line is complete and so that the coal-fired power plants can finish the retirement. PJM also excluded those two power plants from its supply pool when it did its electricity auction that year, which contributed up to 65% of the bill increases we were seeing for supply. Well, the good news is they changed the rules, so that decision didn't go forth in the next auction. It's just a clear example of how these decisions hurt consumers. And of course, Maryland ratepayers are also, I should say, subsidizing these coal plants to stay online, paying them more than they were receiving before, because PJM hadn't planned for their retirement in advance of their announcement. I could keep going. So another example of PJM's decisions hurting Marylanders, and particularly PJM, as folks know, have proposed the highly controversial transmission line, the Piedmont project. And I haven't gotten an update this lately, but the original proposal was to charge Maryland ratepayers for the building of that line, which would cost about $800 million is what has been projected, even though the massive amounts of the energy that is required that is making us build that transmission line is for our data centers in Northern Virginia, not increased usage in Maryland. Traditionally, transmission costs are paid by the stakeholders responsible for increasing the transmission needs. And so there's a 45% increase in energy use in Virginia, and we are predicting load stability in BG&E territory, BG&E Pepco, Maryland, so it doesn't quite make sense. So if it's not clear yet, I'll say again, the increases we're seeing in our electric supply rates are not because there's not enough electricity right now. We have enough electricity for the near term. The increases we're seeing in our bills are because of PJM decisions that are padding energy company and utility profits and forecasted increases in demand for data centers. So that's not to say these won't come and we shouldn't plan for it. But it does mean, we should be working to start getting new energy projects offline, of course. It means that we should be careful and that this crisis doesn't lead to even worse decisions that for our environment or for ratepayers. Maryland legislators have been pushing to study data center impacts and try to ensure ratepayers aren't covering the cost. You're going to hear a bunch of bills being proposed on this year, as well as ensuring that data centers pay the cost of new generation and transmission. So stay tuned to hear about the specific proposals. Excuse me. Maryland PIRG is focusing a lot on supporting policies to help cut red tape and support clean energy deployment like solar and battery storage, as well as continuing to do public education about PJM, its decision-making processes, and these specific examples of how bad decisions have really led to increased bills and trying to refute some of the misinformation there. So I think that's all I've got. I know it's a lot of information, but we didn't want to leave anything out. So hopefully Laurel and I touched on the highlights. Thanks, Matt, so much. It's always love to see you. One of my favorite events of the year. We'll paste some links in the chat.
Yeah, Emily, thank you so much. Laurel, thank you so much. There was a number of great questions that came in, so please make your way over to the Q&A feature and make sure to get those answered. And yeah, thanks for a great, really high level and really down in the weeds kind of topic. So I love both of those. It was personal. It got into the things that people can do, and it really explained these supply and demand issues. So thank you very much to both of you. We're going to move on to our next speaker. And before we do, I want to first say welcome and thank you to Delegate Tom Hutchinson, who's here from District 37B, my delegate. It's always great to see the Eastern Shore delegation representing and showing up to these events. Thank you very much, Delegate Hutchinson. And also Delegate Regina Boyce with District 43A, who's here as well, joining us on the attendee side. Thank you both for being here today. We've had a number of questions come in as well about the screen and whether or not if the presenter is big and the slides are small. You all as attendees can manage that on your end. If you go up to the top right, I believe there's a view button that you can click and you can change the view of the orientation between the slideshow and the presenter at the time. So go ahead and do that, and hopefully that'll fix your problems. So I'm excited to jump into our next keynote speaker here, who's with the Maryland Energy Administration. I'm actually getting to introduce two keynote speakers, which is great. One, a new introductory to many of us here. But first, I'll start with Ian. Ian Ullman is a senior energy advisor at the Maryland Energy Administration, specializing in environmental law, administrative law, energy and climate policy, and legislation. He previously served as the Chief of Staff for the Maryland General Assembly from 2008 to 2013 and brings deep experience navigating the intersection of policy, law, and state government. Joining Ian today is Kelly Speaks Backman. She was appointed by Governor Moore as the Director of the Maryland Energy Administration just last month, December of 2025. And with her, she brings more than 2 decades of leadership across the state government, federal energy programs, and the clean energy sector. She previously served as the Executive Vice President of the Public Affairs at Invenergy, a leading global communications and government relations, and held senior roles at the U.S. Department of Energy, overseeing renewable energy efficiency and sustainable transportation portfolios. And earlier in her career, she was appointed to the Maryland Public Service Commission by Governor O'Malley, giving her deep experience in both energy regulation and policy implementation. And so, Ian and Kelly, I'll let you guys take it over and take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. It's so good to be here, and it's so good to talk to you. We don't get to work together as much as we used to since I came to MEA. So like Matt said, I am Ian Ullman. I'm a senior energy advisor at the Maryland Energy Administration, and I'm really excited to be here at the start of a new year before a new legislative session. Before I go any further, I'm going to allow Kelly to introduce herself, the new director of MEA.
Thank you, Ian. And hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really glad to be back here in Maryland state government to help this administration and to help the state to realize a clean energy future as soon as we possibly can. There's a lot going on these days, especially at the federal level, believe me. But I think there's so much we can do at the state level here in Maryland, and I'm just excited to be able to help push us forward. Ian, thank you so much for all you've done already here at MEA, and I'm looking forward to joining forces with you. I started the 24th of December, so not too long ago. This was actually, I just completed my very first full week at the agency, and I can tell you we are all raring to go and getting ready for ledge session, getting ready to work through everything that went through towards the end of the year in the special session of legislation. So I'm really excited to join in. I'm glad to see so many friendly faces and names that I recognize, and also to meet some new folks. So look forward to meeting you guys over the next few months as I settle in. Ian, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Let's get started. We'll go to the next slide. I am here to discuss the Strategic Energy Investment Fund, known by the lovely acronym of the SEIF, SEIF. I know we've heard a lot about the SEIF, and we will again. Before I go there, though, let me just talk a little bit about MEA and the agency that Kelly now leads. The mission of the Maryland Energy Administration is to provide clean, affordable, and reliable energy solutions and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. MEA is committed to bringing Maryland residents energy which is affordable and clean, that will benefit them and also contribute to addressing climate change. MEA's programs are largely funded through the SEIF. As you can see on the screen, the main SEIF sources are the RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and I'll say more about that in a little bit, but that is a multi-state cap and invest program, as well as alternative compliance payments, known as ACP, that are paid by energy companies under the Renewable Portfolio Standard. The Renewable Portfolio Standard is the law in Maryland that seeks to promote clean energy, and what it says is that over the next couple of years, the state is supposed to get at least half of its energy from clean sources. And when the state falls short, which is we are falling short right now, energy companies can instead pay alternative compliance payments, and those payments come to the SEIF. The other sources are more insignificant in recent years, but sometimes the Public Service Commission will issue orders, for example, if there's a merger or some other kind of settlement that will require companies to pay into the SEIF. And then not on this slide because it hasn't really taken effect yet, but there is a provision in the law that says that 15% of the corporate income tax revenue that is attributable to data centers will come to the SEIF. That is a recent law that passed, I think, only in the last 2 years. I don't believe any funds have actually come into the SEIF through that provision, but as data centers proliferate, that may become a source for the future. The other thing to know about the SEIF is a special fund, and that means that it has specific rules about how it can be utilized. So let's actually go on to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It's specifically, so RGGI proceeds, which again are those proceeds that come in from power plant auctions. Half of those proceeds go to energy assistance. I think I didn't hear all of the previous presentation, but I think that there may have been some discussion about energy assistance programs at the state. Some of those programs are funded from RGGI. The other place that the rest of RGGI goes into the SEIF to be used to fund clean energy and energy efficiency projects. 20% is for low and moderate energy efficiency and conservation programs. Another 20% is for renewable and clean energy programs. And then so Maryland Energy Administration takes those proceeds from RGGI and from alternative compliance payments and PSC settlements, and we use that to fund primarily grant programs across the state. The other thing about these revenue streams is that they can only be used in a certain way. So alternative compliance payments can only be used for clean energy projects. And then according to the law, they can only be used in overburdened communities or for certain low to moderate income customers in certain census tracts. So they are a heavily restricted funding source. Okay, next slide, please. The CEF can only be used, like I was saying, for a specific purpose of the program. They're not to be used for general obligations of the government. That's in the law. And the CEF can only be spent in accordance with the budget. So, the governor will be introducing a budget next week. No, 2 weeks. 2 weeks, you'll see the governor's budget. And that's where the CEF plan for 2027, for fiscal year 2027, will be outlined. MEA and other agencies cannot spend any funds out of the CEF unless it's allocated in the budget. Okay, next slide, please. So RGGI is a voluntary carbon market. It's really a cap and invest program. It's about 10 states in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. And it's been extremely successful. Maryland joined it after passage of the 2006 Healthy Air Act, which a few of you on the call probably helped pass. Even though it's been 20 years, it's been highly successful. It is administered by a RGGI board. MEA does not sit on the board, and MEA is not responsible for implementing the RGGI provisions. That is a responsibility that is left to MDE, and PSC also has a seat on the board. So some of these provisions that you can see here are enacted by agreement between the RGGI states, and then each state implements it individually through their own authorities. So right now, the Department of Environment is in the process of updating Maryland's rules to comply with the most recent RGGI program update, which has reduced the caps on emissions. And these apply to power plants, emitting power plants, right, in Maryland and the other states. There's been a lot of studies about RGGI and its effectiveness, and they've all shown that the investment is substantial. For example, $669 million in net economic benefit, nearly 8,000 jobs added, over just a 2-year period during a recent study, huge economic benefits. And then for really 2 reasons, right? We're reducing emissions, which has huge public health benefits, as well as climate benefits. And at the same time, the revenue that is generated is getting invested back into clean energy efficiency programs. So it's been a really successful program. Next slide, please. So this slide shows recent auctions. So RGGI has auctions 4 times a year. It's a quarterly program where companies that need to emit can purchase that right, essentially. And then there's a market that trades in between. And the last 4 auctions are listed here. That is just the Maryland revenue. That's not for the entire, that's not for all of RGGI. But as you can see, it tends to fluctuate a little bit by quarter, but the trend has been very high. The most recent quarter, I think, was the second or third highest in history. And that demonstrates that the market has confidence in the program. So notwithstanding what's happening at the federal level and other attacks on these kind of programs, RGGI is really healthy, continuing to be a successful program, and that is pumping revenue into the RGGI states, including Maryland, which MEA utilizes, like I said, for clean energy and energy efficiency projects, and also is utilized to help fund those energy assistance programs at a sister agency. The Department of Human Services uses it as well, for customers who have trouble paying their utility bills. That's a big revenue source right there. All right, next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening at MEA, as how we're utilizing the CEF. MEA has nearly 20 programs, I think, that utilize RGGI and alternative compliance payments. And those are, all consistent with the SEEF statute, like I said, for clean energy, for, solar, rooftop solar programs, community solar programs, energy efficiency programs. Some examples here, we have an energy storage program for people to put batteries, in their homes and businesses, and a rooftop solar access program. And those programs saw unprecedented demand increases in light of changes that Congress enacted right last summer. So because of the shift away from at the federal level to shifting away certain incentives, tax credits, that really accelerated demand for state level programs. And actually, for some of these programs, we're struggling to keep up, quite candidly. And then for other programs, the more competitive programs, which we've been moving more towards, we're in that process now of evaluating a lot of those grant applications. Some of those programs some of those applications have closed, some of them are still open. All of those details are on MEA's website. But we see really high demand for all of these programs. Okay, next slide, please. I wanted to give a couple of specific concrete examples of what we're doing with the SEEF. One of those examples is last session, in addition to MEA's regular budget, the General Assembly approved an additional $100 million in clean energy investment for a couple of programs. One is here on the screen. This is our local government partnership program. $64 million, a big increase from previous years, which local governments, counties, and municipalities have applied for to help fund, solar on their roofs, electrification programs, energy efficiency, geothermal. You can see some of the examples here. Most of the counties in the state are participating this year, some municipalities as well. And we're really excited about the partnerships that unlocks. Additionally, $50 million was appropriated for MDOT, so not part of MEA's budget, but also coming out of the SEEF, to help pay for the installation of solar at transportation facilities, light rail stops in Baltimore, park and rides, the airport, places like that. So we are really trying to tap into these kind of partnerships, both with local government, with sister agencies, to really boost our investment in clean energy and electrification. And the next slide has another example, I think, which is our schools program. That's been a big priority at MEA. Investing in schools is just an investment in our community. More efficient schools, especially net zero schools, build support for those kind of buildings, not just the students who learn about it in the curriculum, but also, parents, other members of the community who come to the schools. They see what a clean, modern, highly efficient school looks like, and they can take that home. And then the lessons that we learn from our schools can be brought to other kinds of buildings across the state, right? Schools are just a building like so many others, and we are trying to apply those lessons to to other buildings as well. So those are some examples of investments that we are utilizing the SEEF to really try to invest and make a difference in the state. Next slide, I think, is the last slide I think that I have. Yeah. So this slide will take you to a link that shows where all of our current programs are. I encourage you to take a look. Some of them are consumer facing. Some of them are partnerships with nonprofits, other kind of groups that do those investments. Like I said, some are for government entities. We have a medium heavy duty electric truck program, charging program for to get electric chargers into underserved areas of the state, places where people don't have necessarily ability to charge at home, apartment buildings, libraries, places like that. So you can see the full list of programs at that link. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the SEEF, there's a lot of interest in the SEEF, and we do a report every year that demonstrates and explains and catalogs how we've utilized the SEEF. And the 2025 SEEF report was just posted on our website within the last couple of days. If you have specific questions about how the SEEF has been utilized, then I encourage you to take a look at that report. It's so large that we have to split it into several links, but you can do Control F, you use your find function to find what you're looking for to see the full level of investment that the CEF has been used for. So that's all I have. Back to you, Matt.
Yeah, that was great, Ian. Thank you so much. I'll say for anybody who hears the acronym CEF now this session, they've got a full background on understanding of what it is. And so I can tell you, I've heard it a number of times, and this presentation really helped lock it in for me on exactly what it is. And I'm going to throw a poll out to the audience to see if they're understanding of it too, and see how things worked out. So again, thanks, Ian, for joining. Thank you, Kelly, for introducing yourself and joining here as well. Good luck in your new position. Really look forward to interacting with you and seeing how we can accomplish some great things for the state of Maryland together.
Thanks so much, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, while that poll's open, we're going to go ahead and keep moving into our next speaker, who I'm real excited to introduce, Senator Katie Frey Hester, who's been joining us for a number of years at this summit. Thank you for always coming back and supporting us and educating the community on the legislation that you're working on, which is always always good and impactful legislation. And so, just as a little bit of background, Senator Hester represents district has represented District 9 since 2019. With a background in agriculture and biological engineering from Cornell, she has worked in sustainability research, advocacy, and policy. A Marylander first responder and a WISP ski patrol volunteer. I don't think many people are at WISP today, unfortunately. But Senator Hester is a leading climate champion, sponsoring major legislation like the Renew Act Study Bill and the Energy Resource Adequacy and Planning Act of 2025, both of which I'll mention were vetoed after last session, and then those vetoes were overridden just recently in the special session that the Maryland General Assembly had. So congratulations on that victory, Senator Hester, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to everybody who is here today for your interest in climate change and energy issues and the state of Maryland. It's really great to be here. I was asked to talk a little bit about my work at PJM and then to talk specifically about a couple of the data center bills that I am introducing. And so that's kind of what my presentation will include. I think you already heard quite a bit about, PJM from Emily earlier. But for those who are just joining, obviously PJM is our regional transmission organization, and this includes Maryland and 13 other states plus DC. And the core job of PJM is to ensure reliability for electricity across the region. But obviously now it's challenging, and rates are going up and reliability is being challenged. And this is there's a number of reasons our energy prices are going up, but there is a large proportion that is driven by the new demand from data centers. The Independent Market Monitor has done some research showing that over the last 2 years alone, this load growth has contributed to billions of dollars in excess capacity costs, much of which is being paid by households and small businesses, and also pushing PJM to come really, really close to those reliability standards. That is what keeps everybody's lights on. And the deeper I dug into it, I just realized, how kind of broken PJM's governance structure really is. 80% of the voting power of all the stakeholders who have votes, they also have a direct financial interest in what PJM does. And so there's only a tiny fraction, that the remainder of the 20%, which includes the consumer advocates who are advocating for, the average price of electricity at the households here. So the part that I wanted to talk about, though, I thought was really interesting, and actually, it was a good thing that PJM did this. Which was the critical infrastructure fast path process. But just for a bit of context, can we go to the next slide, and I'll just mention one thing. Yeah, it looks a little different, but this is just mentioning that before PJM started this critical infrastructure fast path process, I worked with others at NCSL, which is a national conference of state legislators, and the Natural Resources, Energy, and Environment Committee, which I co-chair, which includes 250 legislators from all over the 50 states plus territories. And we were able to get through in August of 2025 this NCSL Data Center Power Generation and Grid Resiliency Resolution. And this was critical because it then allowed NCSL to, to begin to lobby at the federal level for the issues that we're talking about today. And there were two key points I wanted it to note from the resolution. Is first, and this is a bipartisan resolution that passed unanimously at our summit. First, it called on the federal government to work in close collaboration with the states to develop cost allocation methods that ensure large-scale energy users pay their fair share. So basically, they're saying don't shift the cost from the data centers to the average, ratepayer. Second, it also called for data centers to contribute to grid stability while protecting local consumers, especially when there are disruptions at times of peak demand. And so we came into this critical infrastructure fast path process with the backing of, this data center resolution to point to, which had been adopted unanimously. Next slide, Pete, please. So basically, the question is, why did PJM launch this critical issue fast path process? It's really what you're seeing on this slide here is the growing demand of energy from the data centers. And so the question is how to integrate this 32 gigawatts of new load that's coming, mostly from data centers. And the rules that PJM, is designing, it will direct how the June 2026 capacity auction happens and sets the prices for the 28-29 delivery year. And so the important thing to realize is that the old rules, if nothing changes, according to the old rules, the PJM region could collectively pay $163 billion more by 2033. And that translates to about $70 per month for the average household. And so that is kind of, we've got this new reality with this huge demand, but we're playing by the old rules. So if nothing changes, that could be the outcome. And so I mentioned earlier that it was the Independent Market Monitor who had talked about these cost increases. They said, according to this Independent Market Monitor, the capacity cost jumped from 2.2 billion in the 24-25 year to 14.7 billion in the 25-26 year. And over 75% of that was due to these data centers. And so the fundamental question that everybody's arguing about in this fast path process was who is going to pay for this growth? And when we run out of power, whose power gets turned off first? The next slide goes into a bit more detail on this. You guys did a great job. They warned me that this slide wasn't going to look good, but it looks great, probably better than it looked before. But here are just some of the key questions. So that the whole PJM process was about. Do data centers have the right to be supplied by the market? Who pays for the necessary infrastructure? How long should we extend the current capacity market price cap? What do we do if PJM runs out of power and we have rolling blackouts? Can we accelerate the process of adding new generation? And how do we address load forecasting challenges? So all of these entities with financial interests were putting in their proposals. And, I worked really closely with Delegate Charkoudian on this, and I believe she's probably joining us next. But there was a bunch of us that formed this PJM Legislators Collaborative. And we had, I think, over 75 legislators from the 13 states in DC who joined together, and we put in our own proposal to how to answer these questions in a way that would still allow data centers to connect, but also protect the pocketbooks and the reliability of all of you. Next slide, please. So I don't expect you to read this. Bridget can put the link to the executive summary, but this is the executive summary of the proposal that the PJM Legislators Collaborative put in. Now, where we are in the process is that PJM is moving very slowly. what happened when we voted is everybody kind of voted for their own proposal plus a couple other ones, and so they all failed. And PJM is now, it's up to the board of directors to do something. And the recent FERC order from December said that they needed to respond by January 19th. So it'll be very interesting in 9 days to see what they actually say, whether they just do like a minor tweak and then say we have to go into a second phase of the critical issue fast path. But many of us, including myself, feel like there are proposals on the table that are comprehensive proposals that would solve the issue. And PJM just needs to make a good decision and not side with the major generators and the data centers, but do something that is good for everybody in the network. But anyways, just briefly, if you could read this slide, what it would say is that the Legislators Collaborative worked with NRDC to pull together many of the strongest elements of the proposals into a single cohesive framework. And if I had to sum it up in one line, it would be that data centers can connect to the grid as fast as they want, but they remain interruptible until they bring their own capacity. And so some of the details, of course, the devil's always in the details. But under our approach, PJM would stop buying capacity on behalf of the data centers that have not secured their own supply. And instead, this firm service would be tied directly to the amount of new capacity a data center adds to the system. And that change alone would have saved the region over $100 billion by 2033 in capacity costs. And I think we got a lot of pushback because data centers do want 100% uninterruptible. Some of them do. But as you'll hear from Delegate Charkoudian next, there are ways where if you just make them a little bit more flexible, and some of the good ones are willing to do this, we can save that $100 billion. So there were a few other things in this proposal, and I'll just wrap up this segment so I can go on to the next thing. But we also supported improved load forecasting to eliminate the speculative projects and reduce unnecessary overbuilding. We supported a temporary extension of the capacity price collar, which was in the governor's proposal, to prevent continued price spikes. And we were really clear that there had to be fair treatment for generators already in the connection queue, many of which are renewable energy and other forms of distributed generation that have been waiting years to interconnect, and we can't put those on the back burner for those data centers. So the last slide that I have here on this part of my PJM update, if you'll go to the next one, it just shows you all of the legislators from all of the states who are able to work with us. And there is a picture of me and the PJM team up there at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And so ultimately, I feel like this is a problem of, physics, not politics, and the board really has the responsibility to choose a solution that fully protects the reliability and the affordability of the existing ratepayers. And hopefully they will do that. So switching gears, and just to say that, I could talk about this PJM process forever, but I know I don't have that much time. If anybody wants to follow up offline, I'm happy to send you our proposal, our executive summary, anything you want to know about PJM in this process. But moving on for now, I have two bills I wanted to talk about. The first one is a data center tax credit alteration. And so we've had a tax credit. We currently offer a tax incentive to data centers, but we don't really ask for very much in return. And so many states and most of Europe have switched so that their tax incentives go towards projects that reduce strain on the grid, have lower emissions, and deliver these long-term benefits. And so we want to make sure that we're using our tax incentives to show that this is not a race to a bottom, but a race towards smarter and more responsible growth. Next slide, please. And so the legislation, this is a fairly simple bill compared to the next one, and it shouldn't say, this is still on the tax center bill, but basically we would be changing our existing tax credit so that the data center would have to meet certain energy efficiency or greenhouse gas performance targets. And the main metric that we're using is that they would have to have a power usage effectiveness score of not more than 1.2, and at least 50% of the energy they procure is clean. And then we instruct that MEA to promulgate regulations to meet these two goals. And so I just personally feel that if the state should be encouraging growth, but should be encouraging growth in a way that aligns with our climate goals and protects ratepayers. So that is a simple tax credit bill. We'll have to see how simple it is to get passed, but would love all of your support in advocating for that bill. The next bill is the large load registry, and this is much more complicated. But basically, what we've seen at the state level is that we really want better visibility into what is coming. And so that this bill establishes a large load registry, which would require the data centers to submit their key information into one place. And the goal is to get more of this information in order to enable smarter planning. It will give policymakers and regulators a clear picture of where these large loads are locating, and that by creating this shared reliable data foundation, we can plan better for the center. And just if you look currently across these different agencies, and this is just the state level, it doesn't even include the local level, but there's no comprehensive visibility into where the large loads are locating, how much power they need, or what their water and infrastructure impacts are. And so it's MDE, DNR, PSC, MEA, Department of Commerce. They're all kind of working in silos on various pieces of this puzzle. And so the centralized large load registry would bring them together along with the county planning process to make coordinated decisions. So there's four components to the bill. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just talk about the first one here. The first one, part of the large load registry, is a state and local permitting and siting board. And the point of this board is to look across the state and identify places that could be better for data centers than others. And this board would ensure that the relevant data, water, environmental impacts, energy, is in one place, and really to find places where they could be a better fit than others. And if you think about it, there's already different legislation happening at the local level about, incentivizing or banning or waiting on data centers. And because there's such limited natural resources like water and such limited energy, it really, whichever data center comes first, it can suck the resources. Like if it takes all the water, that's available in one watershed, it can affect one county, but it can also affect the next county over. So that is part of the reason why I think it's really important that we have a state level overview of how these things work, and recommend some places where it would make sense to fast track data centers if we want to have them anywhere. So moving on to the next slide here. The large load registries, like I said, trying to improve the transmission, the transparency. And so here you just can see some of the different things that would need to be considered in the registry, everything from transmission capacity upgrades to information from PJM, load forecasts, environmental impacts. And then we'll move it to it later. But basically, once we have knowledge of like who is coming, then we can put some of them on a fast track. And that, I believe, is the next slide. Or maybe not. Yes. So under this proposal, when the center completes its large load registry, it can then choose to apply for the fast track in the permitting process. And to be eligible, this is going to sound familiar from our experience working with PJM, the data center must commit to several things or a combination of these things. And we're not saying they can't come without these things. We're saying that if they come with these things, they will move faster than otherwise. And so these things are bringing new generation that can deliver power to the facility, or agree to provide a demand side product that helps the grid. Or there was the third thing. that flexibility, that is the bill that Delegate Charkoudian will talk about later. And so whether they're bringing storage or new generation or flexibility, those are the three key things that would then allow them to move, in this large load registry to the fast track process. Final slide here, moving on one more, is around curtailment. Is it not there? That's okay. Let me just, the slides got mixed up a little bit, but that's totally fine. There was another slide that talked about curtailment. And so this is also just giving, making sure that the state has a position in temporarily reducing the power during times of peak demand or grid stress. And we all know that the benefits, that there is a huge benefit that these data centers can bring to grid stability, but we also know that we need to be able to curtail them during certain times. And so this bill would empower the state to have a seat at the table when those decisions are being made. So that's the end of that second bill. There's a few other bills I just wanted to mention. I think I said that the demand response bill, the Delegate Charkoudian has been leading on. I'm very delighted to be helping her with that. I think Emily covered the utility cost recovery limitations, which will be SB2, and I'm happy to be working on that. And then there's also a third bill, which mostly goes to the cost savings side, but that is called the Savings Act, and really is designed to encourage the utilities to do more, to consider more options, more non-wires alternatives, so that they have different, when they come for these ratepayer hearings, the PSC will be asking them, for their least cost alternative. And so that's a summary of everything that I've got, Matt. I really thank you for the opportunity to present today, and really would appreciate your support and everybody's support in getting some of these bigger, more controversial bills over the finish line.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much, Senator. Just first, for the people who do want to get involved, should they email you, or do you have your chief of staff or anybody that you'd like for them to get in contact? You can please let everyone know there.
Great question, Matt. Just the email that's on the slide right now, katiefry.hester@senate.maryland.gov. That is the correct email, and we'll both see it.
That's great. And I'm not going to let you go just yet because I got a few questions that
Oh, okay.
can answer. Yeah, great. So, sticking with the data center theme here, the question that came in is the projected energy usage by data centers is clearly unsustainable. All of our energy savings is being wiped out by these increases. The current centers will likely become obsolete as the industry evolves and speculation settles down. Would it not be wise to look at this investment from that perspective? I think from the perspective of these data centers becoming obsolete.
That's a great question. I mean, I think that, whether they're here in Maryland or here in another state, or are obsolete here or obsolete in another state, they're all going to be influenced by PJM because we're tied together in the capacity market. And so I guess it's a really interesting question, but and I like the long-term thinking. But I don't have a great answer except that we have to think broadly long term, but not only just in Maryland, across the entire PJM area.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Another question that came in about data centers, it's asking, do data centers bring their own capacity? And does that mean more gas turbines and associated emissions needed for those data centers?
So in our bill, we're hoping that they will bring some kind of clean energy, right? But to bring their own capacity, that would be like their firm service above, like up above whatever they contract with PJM for at a certain level. Then if it goes into a peak, then they'd have to bring their own generation. And once again, it could be a gas turbine, it could be a diesel generator, which would be horrible. But we are hoping to incentivize that they will do something with either battery storage, solar, or some other clean kind of energy.
Yeah, yeah, great. I've got a couple more if you're willing to sit.
Yeah, keep going. I'll do the best I
Yeah.
can.
So another one, does any type of new energy generation, i.e. gas, coal, or nuclear, qualify for fast track?
So we're still waiting for the language to come back, right? But our intent was that we would hope that it would be clean, and that would include nuclear or small modular reactors, which hopefully will be here in 7 to 8 years. But it would sorry it is important that they do bring their own, and for the fast track I think that we've said that we're going to incentivize it if it is of the clean version.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of good sense. So you've got more questions coming in than I think we have time to answer live. If you're able to answer those, head over to the Q&A feature and maybe answer those through text. I'm sure the audience would really appreciate that.
Okay, I'll do the best that I can. Thanks so much, Matt, and thank
Yeah.
you everybody for tuning in. Have a great
Oh, yeah.
day.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Senator. And I'll say it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Hester Fry right before introducing Delegate Charkoudian, because as you heard, these two work a lot together on these issues. And so, just kind of as a continuation of some of what was just heard, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker to you. So, Delegate Charkoudian has represented Maryland's District 20 since 2019 and serves as the Vice Chair of the House and Economic Matters Committee, a very important committee for this work. She's also co-chair of the Maryland Transit Caucus and a member of the Latino Legislative Caucus and the Women's Caucus. A longtime champion for clean air, water, and energy, Delegate Charkoudian has led efforts to hold polluters accountable, expand in-state geothermal energy, and divert food waste from landfills, policies that are now law. She continues to push for affordable, reliable, and sustainable electric grid, advancing smart grid technologies, battery storage, offshore wind, and accessible solar for all of Marylanders. So you really have a wide breadth of impact here on the work that you do, Delegate, and I'm really excited for you to be here with us today to talk about the bills that you're working on.
Well, thank you, Matt. And thanks to, I know it's a really impressive set of people who have organized this. And so I won't try to name everyone, but thank you to all of you who put this together. And thanks to everyone who's here and who I know has worked, many of you, for years on climate justice and environmental justice issues in the Maryland General Assembly. And thank you in advance for the work that you're going to do this year. So I've got a couple bills that I'm talking about. I think looks like this one is first. So at this point, PJM, some of you may recall that like years ago, I was like 2019, 2020, I was like, hey guys, we need to pay attention to PJM. And some of you were really active with me when we had the MOPR and we were trying to figure out what do we do about the minimum offer price rule. Well, fast forward, 7 years, and our worst nightmares have come true in terms of PJM. All the issues that we've been raising for years about their capacity auction and all the rules that are designed to really thwart clean energy. And here we are, not only having thwarted clean energy, but actually having thwarted with them having thwarted clean energy, but also them having thwarted energy growth at all. And so a lot of the issues that we're facing right now in terms of reliability and resource adequacy, we would probably still have with the data center growth, but it would not be as acute if PJM had not had so many broken rules and so many broken the capacity auction and so on. So now everyone knows what PJM is. And last year we made some progress with accountability for the utilities and how they vote in PJM. And now we're trying to push things just a little bit further and say, okay, RTOs are good and we believe in them. But at this point, it's really the responsible thing to do to ask, is it more advantageous to stay with PJM with all of its flaws and problems, or should we be looking at an RTO that's a subset of PJM? And really, the way the bill is written, it requires PSC and MEA to study it says nearby states, a coalition of states. The states who are really looking at this and saying this out loud are Pennsylvania, New Jersey. New Jersey passed this bill, this one that I'm talking about right now, out of the House and hoping to get it out of the Senate this year. Delaware's looking at it. So the idea is, can we study what does it look like to leave PJM and join, create our own RTO with a subset of states, and or leave the PJM capacity market using the fixed resource requirement rule, which PJM allows, but not just doing an FRR as the state of Maryland, but doing it with the other states in the surrounding area. So we continue to benefit from what an RTO benefits from, right? A multi-state sharing, and the benefits that come with that, but without the all of the problems that come from the fact that in PJM, the market participants, the polluters, the utilities are the ones who are really writing the rules to benefit themselves. So, on one level, I think it's really responsible and good to be analyzing this and looking at it, and we could find out that really it does make sense to start a process. But I think if nothing else, even if the reviews come back and we look at it and the cost benefit kind of doesn't work out, I think it's really important that we continue to signal to PJM, that we're seriously looking at other alternatives, because it's part of our efforts to put pressure on PJM to be more responsive to state policy, and just in general to reform away from what is a somewhat corrupt system of market participants writing the rules that benefit their shareholders. Matt, I'm not sure, do you take questions on each bill as we're going through, or do you take them all at the end?
Here I am. We will take them as they come through if it makes sense. Otherwise, we'll save them to the end if that's okay. We don't have any right now at this point.
That's fine. I know I just went through faster on this one, but I think the ones that are coming up are longer to discuss, and so I'll kind of yield my time to myself and move on to advanced transmission technologies. So some of you may have been familiar with the ATT GETS Grid Enhancing Technologies bill from last year. If you want to go ahead and shift to the next slide. This is essentially the same one with a couple of adjustments based on conversations with the Attorney General's office. So just as a reminder, this bill passed the House and it died in the Senate. So what this bill does, advanced transmission technologies, grid enhancing technologies, different terms for the same basic set of technologies. They basically allow us to get more out of the same poles and wires and right of way in a transmission context. And so they're efficiency technologies. They allow us to get more out of the transmission that we already have, or in an upgrade out of the same right of way, reconductoring or otherwise. So the reason that utilities generally don't like them is because if you're using these technologies, you get more out of less hardware and less capital. And so if you're trying to build as much as possible to have a higher asset class to charge off of a rate of return on the equity, then you wouldn't want the most efficient thing possible. You would want the least efficient thing possible. Furthermore, a lot of these technologies are software, and so they're operational expenses as opposed to capital expenses, and it's the capital expenses that utilities are able to get the rate of return on. So for all these reasons, you would normally think, well, if it's more efficient technology and we can get more out of transmission with these technologies, then why wouldn't utilities be implementing them? But that's why they're not implementing them on their own, and that's why we always need to remind the utilities and each other that they are regulated monopolies, so we do get to tell them what to do. And we don't need to incentivize them or bribe them to do the right thing. We just need to get our laws right. And so this bill basically really moves to increase the use of these technologies. And I'll tell you how in a second. I do want to have one caveat on this conversation, because I think that while there's a lot that we can do with the advanced transmission technologies, getting more out of what we have, I do think that it's important that we all note that we still do need to build more transmission. If we're going to have a clean energy future, there is a need for more transmission that goes in different directions, because the transmission that we've developed up until this point essentially goes from where you have fossil fuel plants to where you have population centers. And when we do things like offshore wind, where we're bringing in energy from east to west instead of west to east, it does mean we have to build more transmission. So we can get more out of the transmission we have and more out of the new transmission using ATTs, but I don't think we want to talk about this as a way to sort of avoid the need for transmission, across the board. So having said that, one of the complicating factors in this bill is that generally transmission is, from a jurisdictional perspective, transmission is under FERC jurisdiction and or PJM jurisdiction as a result. And so we have to kind of be creative and walk this fine line to figure out really where is it that the Public Service Commission has the ability to drive the analysis around are the utilities maximizing use of GETS. And so this bill puts a process into the CPCN process, the Certificate for Public Need and Convenience. And it also puts in a every 4-year review process that the utilities have to go through, essentially looking at could they avoid some of these supplemental transmission projects that they do on a regular basis? Could they avoid those by doing by using GETS on some of the systems as they currently have them? So again, it's very similar to the bill that we had last year. A couple of changes to refine some of the issues that were raised around the jurisdictional issue, and hoping it moves forward. Take questions if there are any.
Yeah, we actually do have one coming in here. So while we have you, the question says, wouldn't it make sense to require that any plan to build a data center to locate and build using geothermal basis? I'll repeat that again, sorry. Wouldn't it make sense to require that any plan to build a data center to locate and build using geothermal basis, i.e., building a data center in an area where the geothermal wells will generate energy because they are designed to harvest beneath the data center for energy?
I think, I'm not reading the question. I think really what you're thinking about maybe, or the way that we're thinking about the role of networks and heat networks as it relates to data centers is more on the side of waste heat. So generally the data centers have a lot of waste heat. The cooling that has to happen to all of those servers leads to a lot of waste heat. So I guess in theory, you could build a geothermal system to cool, but because you have a system that is cooling, and now this is just to be clear, this ATT has nothing to do with data centers, but I think maybe that was a question from before, and I think I know the answer, so I'm just gonna take a shot at it. I think where people talk about the heat and the sharing of the heat as it relates to data centers generally is taking the waste heat. So the heat that is coming off of the cooling needs for data centers. There's a couple things that can be done with it. In New York, I think there's a data center that's actually heating multifamily housing that's right next door to it. That requires some amount of proximity. In Europe, there's a lot of waste heat that's being used for industrial uses. And I'm told that actually in Europe, there's some systems that actually travel a couple of miles. That would require sort of some kind of cost benefit analysis of if you're going to build a pipeline, to move the heat, 3 miles, what are the costs and the benefits of that? But a lot of industrial, high heat, not super high heat like steel, but high heat like bottling plants kind of thing, can use the waste heat from data centers. And I do think that that's an area that's worth exploring in the state.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I've got one more for you on this on I think the topic here. Where we go? So the question is on the energy usage of recirculation systems versus cooling systems. And the question is, do you believe that the finite nature of our water resources should be a consideration there?
So that's about data centers again, then not GETS, I guess. Yes, I do think that water systems, yes, I think that obviously the data center policies, there's a lot of pieces in it. I'm dealing with one part of it in the bill that we're going to get to in a minute. Maybe we should get to it since data centers is what everyone wants to talk about. I get it. But yes, my particular bill as it relates to data centers does not touch on the water issues, but I do think, what you're seeing, and you're going to see a whole bunch of bills related to data centers, and I'm hoping that some of them do touch on water use. It's my understanding, and this is a little bit, it is my understanding that the air-cooled data centers is somewhat better from the perspective of water use, but I'm not sure then how they line up in terms of energy usage overall. I would have to look that up, and so I don't know if that's a reason. I think, though, that more and more data centers are moving towards the air-cooled, which is the circular, but that does still use a lot of energy. So I'm sure there's trade-offs, and I don't feel like I'm an expert on that particular point. So someone else might be able to weigh in on it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and we can answer that question in the chat as well if anybody else on the panelist has a response to that. But yeah, let's get to your other two bills here. The first one, or the next one we have up, is the solar energy reform.
We're just going to tease people and make them wait even longer.
Yeah, well, let's
Okay.
jump ahead. Do you want to jump
Okay.
ahead to
No,
data
no, no.
center?
We'll do solar.
Okay.
It's good. It's good. I
Yeah.
love it all. I love it all. Again, many of you worked on the ACE Act last year. Thank you for your work on that. In fact, your work on the ACE Act in general led us to a place where what started is we're going to subsidize gas turned into a bill that was mostly good with a little bit of fast tracking of potential gas. And hopefully we're going to squash that now that everyone sees that it requires a subsidy. But we can come back to that. The solar energy part of the ACE Act, of course, didn't pass. And so we're back with bringing that back for more. So what you might recall, a couple things. One is that when we passed the SREC system has, allowed us to make some progress in the state on solar, and but there's a lot of aspects of the SREC system that we have right now that don't work. So one of the aspects is that we set the caps of the price, the alternative compliance payment, in law. And what we found since 2019, when we set those caps, and they made a lot of sense based on the projections that could be made in 2019, was that then we had a pandemic, and then we had supply chain issues, and then we had inflation, and then we had a good federal policy, and now we have a bad federal policy. And so all of these things have resulted in the prices for those SRECs not consistently working for solar. Furthermore, different kinds of solar needs different kinds of price incentives. So rooftop solar needs one type of price incentive, but if you take that same price incentive and offer it to utility scale solar, you're giving them way more than they need. And so from the perspective of really wanting to build all different kinds of solar, because we need all of them, and wanting to make sure that any money that we are investing in solar is sort of the most bang for our buck, we are changing the way that SRECs, solar renewable energy credits, are procured in the state. So anything that had an SREC from the previous system continues to have that SREC, so we keep that certainty in the market. God knows the solar market has had enough uncertainty in it. So anything that has an SREC previous system, that stays, and it's what they might have expected and projected over the next 15, 20 years, whatever the remaining life is on the system. But then going forward, after this becomes law, so 2027, 2028, any of the utility scale projects would bid in a competitive procurement. And so this is, drives the price down, but makes sure that each of those projects actually gets what it needs in order to get built. It also allows for in different, I'll come back to that. And then for rooftop and community solar, for any distributed energy, there's an administratively determined incentive. So basically it is set by the Public Service Commission and reset by the Public Service Commission every 3 years or more often if they determine that's necessary. And here's why both of those are really good for consumers and really good for solar. When things are going really bad in the world, as they are now with the federal government's war on clean energy, we need to be able to offer a little bit more to get the solar built. But we have faith, and we will turn this ship around, and we will have a federal government in the near future who is back on track and supporting clean energy. And at that point, we really want to be able to lower what it is that Maryland is offering as incentives. And if we have supply chain challenges, then we want to be able to increase. And if those challenges go away, we want to lower it. So what we want is, coming back to this idea of bang for the buck, we really want to make sure that everything that is needed to get the solar built gets invested to get the solar built, and no more than that, because this is ratepayer or taxpayer money, in this case, ratepayer money that's going towards that. And so that's sort of the restructuring. This is based pretty closely off of what New Jersey has done, and it's worked well for them over the last couple of years. We made a couple of changes to make it work for Maryland. But the really important thing, given where we are at this moment in time with electric bills, is that we wanted to be able to move this new way of doing solar forward without having any increase to people's electric bills. And so right now we have an RPS that is essentially collecting, as it relates to tier 1 RECs, it is essentially collecting alternative compliance payments. And based on the projections in the PJM region, we expect that for the next 5 or 6 years, we will be collecting alternative compliance payments instead of buying tier 1 RECs. And so, as you probably know, I think there's been conversations about the CEF. That money goes into the CEF right now, and then it either gets spent on grants, or it gets spent to balance the budget, or it gets spent on rebates, sometimes to people who need them and sometimes to people who don't need them. And so the idea behind this bill is money that is collected for the RPS should be invested in the RPS. And so it takes all the alternative compliance payments for tier 1 RECs, which we expect to be somewhere between $200 and $300 million a year over the next 5 years, and it puts it into an account to pay for the new SRECs. So money collected for the RPS, spent on the RPS. Even in a best case scenario, when it goes into grants at MEA, it's a little less direct in terms of its leading to solar getting built. And so this is a way that we can protect the money that's collected by ratepayers and make it go to the program that it is designed for. So that is, if you've been talking about the CEF, I just point out there's other revenues in the CEF. There's RGGI, there's fines, there's all kinds of other things that goes into the CEF. So this doesn't take all the money out of the CEF, but it does keep the money that was collected for the RPS and uses it for the RPS, which has elements of justice and ratepayer protection also involved in it. The final thing, and I know many of you are excited about this, is it authorizes balcony solar or portable solar, plug-in solar in the state. And this is, folks may be familiar, you buy a couple panels from IKEA and you can plug it in and it, produces enough energy to offset maybe a refrigerator. It's particularly important from an equity perspective if someone has a balcony in a multifamily apartment but doesn't have the ability to put solar on their roof. They can offset payoffs from these systems are like 5 years, maybe 5 to 7 years. That is a little more complicated than it was a couple of weeks ago because of some changes in terms of the federal electrical safety standards, but we're still going to go forward with this, and we think that we'll be able to see these implemented in the state of Maryland. I'll take questions. Oh, hey, sorry. Can I say one other thing?
Yeah, please.
The one other thing that this bill does, this isn't technically new, but it's important. A couple of years back, we instituted a requirement that all of the projects that are built in the state above 1 megawatt are built with prevailing wage. Over the last few years, I've been working with the unions, and we realized that that wasn't really being enforced. And so we've worked over the last couple months with the unions and with the Maryland Department of Labor and added a considerable amount of language to the statute. So it's not really new that it requires prevailing wage, but this will allow that prevailing wage to be able to be enforced. And that's really important, in terms of implementing the legislative intent.
Great. Well, let's hold off on any questions. We'll move to the anticipated data center bill, and then we'll see how the questions look after that, if that's okay with you, Delegate.
That's fine.
Great.
So I do feel like I need to start with this is not the comprehensive fix everything about data center bills. I think this is this group that I'm speaking to, all of you, very well educated and connected and concerned and have done a lot of research on all of the pieces around data centers. And so I'm happy to take questions about any parts of it. But my goal with this bill is to address the issue of capacity and to really drive us towards building clean capacity as opposed to focusing on bringing more generation. And so I think folks are probably familiar with the fact that in general, the issue that we face as it relates to growing load is growing peak load. So that's 50 hours a year. It could get to 100 hours a year. It could be 200 hours a year, depending on how load growth happens. But it's not 24/7, 365 days a year. And so a lot of the conversation about data center bringing their own generation really is driving towards policies that are going to lead to more gas plants. And so while there is the need for some more generation on the grid, I'm really interested in focusing on the concepts of capacity. And that capacity could be brought in a couple of different ways. It could be brought with flexible load, which is a data center actually shifts its usage, right? So it pre-cools its system on the days that it knows that it's going to be a peak demand day, right? So we know we're going to hit a peak, or we're likely to hit a peak at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The system pre-cools at 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and is able to curtail its usage as a result by 20%, 30%, whatever it might be. There's also, so that's an example of a temporal shift. Another example of a temporal shift in demand response is that a data center might actually be able to curtail the work of the servers, and that depends on the kinds of data center it is, during a period of a peak period. It could do spatial shifting, which I am aware of as a technical point. I don't know that it's happening in a really substantial way, but in theory it's possible. That's where you take the work, if it's all Amazon Web Services data centers and they stop working, some of the work on this in this facility here, and they move it to Ohio, or they move it to someplace on the grid where it's not experiencing a peak. And then, of course, the other really significant way to do demand response, to engage in demand response, to add capacity, to be flexible, is to add battery storage. And that battery storage could be behind the meter, or it could be a contract with battery storage in front of the meter, as long as it has the ability to address the peak periods. And so if folks are not familiar with a Duke study that was done a couple of months ago, it essentially looks at, okay, if every data center could be flexible 100 hours a year, now I don't have it in front of me, but it's something along these lines, some number of hours a year, and it looks at the flexibility. It actually looks at a continuum of different amounts of flexibility. But if every data center could be flexible X number of hours a year, we could avoid building 100 gigawatts of generation over the next 10 years. That's really important, because given where the federal government is, given where PJM is, given where data centers are, if we respond to data center growth with building more generation, or primarily building generation, as opposed to really looking at flexibility and battery storage, we are going to end up with a lot more gas plants. And so it's why this bill focuses exclusively on how do we drive more storage and flexibility. Not because other things aren't important as it relates to data centers, but because I want to center this in how we're thinking about data centers, how we're thinking about responding to the peak increase. Of course, this gets complicated further by the fact that we're in PJM, and PJM is broken, and every system is designed to support shareholders of incumbent generators and utilities, and also to build more gas. And so part of what we had to do with this bill is really find ways to say, okay, what is it we get to do in Maryland? How do we make this happen in Maryland, even with the brokenness of PJM around us? And so the first is a voluntary demand response program within the state. Right now, PJM's demand response program requires that a load be 365-day a year, 24/7 flexible. And that's just not realistic, that they sign off that they could be called on anytime. And it's actually not needed. You don't need to call on them at 3 o'clock in the morning in October. And so building a voluntary demand response program in the state is a piece of the puzzle. Second piece of the puzzle is this actually isn't on here, but to set up rules for behind the meter battery storage. Right now, battery storage behind the meter gets counted as load. With appropriate rules, we can make sure it gets counted as flexibility instead of getting counted as load, because you really don't want it to be counted as load when it's being added as flexibility. The next thing that this does is it requires that all data centers bring a portion of their capacity, and there's a fast track for data centers that bring 100% of their capacity. All the demand response and all of the capacity in this bill restricts that it can't have on-site emissions, so it can't be essentially diesel generators. Battery storage, the truth is that if we put battery storage on the grid right now, it will use whatever's on the grid, which includes gas, but it's not adding to the localized pollution and the EJ issues associated with that. So capacity, 100% capacity. Now, this gets to another challenge that we have, which is, let's say you had let's say you had a data center that said, okay, I want to be fast tracked. I'm going to buy 200 megawatts of storage. I'd like to contract that out somewhere on the grid within my same jurisdiction, my same LSE. But now you're back into the problem of PJM. And PJM's like, okay, well, that 200 megawatts of battery storage can get at the back of this line here and wait for 4 years. And so we've sort of lost the ability to fast track anything. And so what this bill uses is the surplus interconnection rights. So for folks who may or may not have tracked this, one of the changes that many of us have been begging PJM to do for years, they finally conceded and did it in this crisis, is allow for this concept of surplus interconnection rights, which is this. If you have 100 megawatts of solar somewhere on the grid, that the grid itself can handle an injection of 100 megawatts of energy, right? So it's built to that. But that particular system is not actually putting that much energy on the grid 24/7. Maybe it's using 25% of its interconnection capacity. And so what that means is there's more capacity there that you could put 75%, in fact, in there. And so what surplus interconnection rights at PJM allows for is, without having to do a whole study, without having to get at the back of the line, that solar project could add storage there for the surplus, right? The difference between how much they're using of that 100 megawatts and the amount that they're sort of allowed to use, right? So right now, PJM established this back in January. It has been underutilized. And so what this bill does is it says it sets up Maryland Energy Administration as essentially like a dating app, matchmaking, finding out where we have surplus interconnection, and then connecting data centers who are interested in fast tracking to those surplus interconnection rights, so that those would be places where we could very quickly get capacity. In this case, primarily it's battery storage onto the grid to respond to the increased then load from the data center. I'll take questions.
You sure have a lot of them coming in.
I bet I do.
Yeah, we're actually heading up against our break. And so if you're okay with the delegate, I'm going to ask if you can look into the Q&A feature and go ahead and start chipping away at those questions.
Sure.
The audience is probably eager for a break away from their screen for a minute. And so I do want to thank you. These are all really important pieces of legislation that I'm excited to see move through the General Assembly. And just by the number of questions coming here, a lot of people are interested in as well. So thank you very much for presenting on all these today, and thanks for always being a champion for our energy and our climate issues here in Maryland. I really
Sure
appreciate
thing.
it.
Thanks for letting me be part of it.
Yeah, thank you. And so for everybody, we're going to move into a quick break. We have 5 minutes scheduled here. And before we do so, I just want to remind everybody that if you can't get the view locked down to where the slides are big and the presenter is a little smaller, in the top right-hand corner is a button that says View. You can click that and toggle on different views to see what works best for you. Give that a try during the break. Hopefully you can figure it out. But if not, there's still a lot of good information being presented, and we will have the slideshow available afterwards for folks to look at. So again, thanks for being part of this. We're going to move into a break here and get things rolling. We'll see you in just about 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the timer there having paused a little bit, but welcome back from our break for the second part of our program today. Kicking us off, we're going to continue with our legislative presentations here, and kicking us off next is Delegate Chi. Delegate Chi has represented Maryland's District 15 since 2019 and serves on the House Economic Matters Committee, where she leads the Economic Development Subcommittee. She has helped secure millions in state matching grants for clean energy manufacturing and innovation, strengthening Maryland's economy and competitiveness. Delegate Chi has been recognized as the Legislator of the Year by the Maryland Tech Council, the Maryland Retailers Association, and the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce for her leadership and impact. Speaking here for Delegate Chi today is Katie Mettle, who's representing Advance Energy United. And so, Katie, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you if you're good with that.
Hi. Thanks everyone for being here. Unfortunately, Delegate Chi is running from another event, so she's going to call in just a minute, so I'll just get us started. My name is Katie Mettle, and I'm from Advanced Energy United. And I had the pleasure of working with Delegate Chi when I was a staffer inside the House Economic Matters Committee a couple of years ago. And we're really pleased that she and Senator Hester are sponsoring this bill. So the Savings Act stands for Securing Affordable, Valuable Investments in Next Generation Grid Solutions. And this is a bill that is going to create more accountability for demand side and non-wire solutions and every kind of advanced energy technology that you can think of that can help to make the grid more cost effective to build. So when you think about people's energy bills, we've got the electricity supply side and we also have the electricity delivery side. This bill will directly address the electricity supply side and directly address the electricity delivery side and indirectly benefit the electricity supply side as well. So what this is going to do is require utilities. Oh, Delegate Chi just joined us. Hi, Delegate Chi.
Hi,
Hi, I know you just came from another event. I
I
just
know.
I just started talking about the bill. Do you want to jump in? I haven't even gotten into the meat yet. I was just doing introductions.
Actually, go ahead, please, because I'm in my car and it's raining like hell.
Absolutely. And then feel free to jump in. Yeah, it is
Sure,
time to pick
great.
up. So what the Savings Act is going to do is require utilities to create a cost containment plan. And this is really going to be an accountability measure in order to kind of centrally document everything that utilities are already doing within other programs. So it's not going to step on the distribution system planning work groups work. It's not going to step on the Drive Act and VPPs, but it's going to account for them in this mechanism of just keeping track of what folks are doing and what the utilities are doing. So cost containment plans can be very inclusive. Anything that can help to save money on capital expenses is going to be able to be included by utilities in their plans. But they do have to include several different things. They have to articulate what they are doing in their electric system plan, including non-wire solutions and DERs. They have to include ATTs, automated load management, demand flexibility, flexible interconnection, GETs, grid flexibility programs that achieve a goal of greater than 20% net system peak by 2030. So we do have our first metric there. Also building electrification and efficiency, VPPs, how the utility is coordinating distribution investments and transmission planning in the most cost-effective way, and how they are complying with the FERC order regarding regional versus local transmission. And these cost containment plans have to altogether reduce peak system load by at least 500 megawatts over 2024 levels by 2030 and be projected to produce demonstrable and significant cost savings according to the PSC's Unified Benefit Cost Analysis Framework. So the PSC is going to approve these plans. They can also go back to utility and tell them that they need to do their homework over again. And if the utility fails to meet either of these two measurable goals by 2030, the PSC will have a menu of options that they may choose to use in order to penalize the utility. So they can fine the utility, they can reduce their ROE, or they can partially or fully deny the cost of recovery for their approved cost containment plan. So what this is really going to do is bring accountability to a lot of programs that are really great that the PSC is working on, and just kind of bring in that measurable metric and that stick that is needed in order to really make them much more enforceable and give them a lot more heft and a lot more weight. So it's really meant to complement the work that is already being done. Now, this is something that we haven't seen another state do something quite like this before, which is very exciting. And we're excited to see where this can go and what other states we can also bring this to and maybe make this happen in a few different places. There is some really interesting data that does suggest, demonstrate, argue that this could save hundreds of millions of dollars over decades. We're talking long-term savings that can really benefit people for a very long time and be really transformative in the utility business model and how it works and how it affects us every day. So there's some really great data from the OPC that shows up to 44% as of last summer of a person's electricity bill could actually come directly from their delivery costs. And we've also got some really great data showing that for the last 15 or 16 years from 2010, electricity delivery costs have doubled or tripled that of inflation in most service territories in Maryland. And even though I'm sure that this has come up before on the call today and might come up later today again and come up tomorrow, you can't beat the dead horse too much when we talk about how utilities make their money. Investor-owned utilities have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. They do not have a fiduciary responsibility to their customers, and they have an unusual incentive. Most businesses that are on the stock market, they have to keep their overhead low to maximize their profits. But because utilities are in this unusual situation of effectively having their rates set and capped and needing that approval from the PSC, but also being rewarded with a very generous return on equity for their capital expenses that is almost effectively guaranteed. And when they do get it, it's pretty high. They don't have the thin margins that most businesses have. They have a perverse incentive to spend as much money as possible. So what we're really going to do is get them to minimize new pole and wire build out, still deliver a more efficient grid that has lower demand. When we reduce peak demand with these advanced energy technologies and solutions, then what we do is we're actually creating more headroom that creates a more reliable grid, and that frees up supply, and that also can have a positive downward pressure effect on wholesale market prices and potentially the capacity market too. There have been studies from New Jersey and New York that have indicated that when these kinds of investments are made, you can see a tremendous return. There was a great study in New Jersey that showed, I have the numbers in front of me. I have to scroll down on my page to find them. Let's see. In New Jersey, there was a study that projected that $340.7 million worth of capital investments in these kinds of advanced energy solutions across 66 projects would yield in real discounted dollars, including depreciation, would yield $761 million. That's in real dollars, over 20 years. So that's almost double the value. And then in New York, there was a study about using grid flexibility across the entire state, just not New York City, but in New York State, they discovered that with grid flexibility, they had the potential to lower their summer peak demand by 11% by 2030, which is wild. It's just so much.
Yeah. Katie, we're running a little bit over time, if you don't mind
Sorry,
wrapping up a little bit.
sorry. I wanted to cover all the bases. Sorry about that.
Doing
So
a
that's
great job. Thank you.
nutshell. And thank you so much to Delegate Chi.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Chief, for making an appearance. Thank you, Katie, for all that great information in the background. We do have a question in the chat, if you don't mind looking at the Q&A and going ahead and try to answer that question. And please go ahead and throw in the chat for the attendees any links or any more information about the bill or how they can get involved. That'd be great. Great. All right, awesome. We're gonna move on to our next presenter here, Delegate Polakovich Carr. Um, Delegate Polakovich Carr has been a driving force in Maryland's District 17 since 2019. I'm realizing the class of 2019 is extremely impactful considering how many legislators I've introduced today from that year. So another one here, Delegate Polakovich Carr serves on the House Ways and Means Committee, chairs its Revenue Subcommittee, and has helped shape multiple caucuses and subcommittees, including as the secretary of the Maryland Legislative Transit Caucus. Before joining the House, she brought bold action to Rockville's City Council, sponsoring landmark measures to ban smoking in outdoor dining areas, strengthen animal cruelty laws, and launch water conservation programs from seniors and low-income families. Delegate, I'm real excited to have you here today, and I'm going to turn the slide here so you can get started.
Thanks so much, Matt, for the kind introduction. It's great to be with everybody today on what is, at least in Montgomery County, a very rainy Saturday afternoon. Well, I know you've heard a bit about data centers from multiple other presenters today. I came in during Delegate Charkoudian's presentation, and I have to tip my hat to her because she really has been the champion of, I'd say, accountability and trying to do better in this industry, this growing industry in Maryland. The legislation that I'm bringing forward this session would repeal certain tax breaks for data centers, and we can go ahead and go to my next slide. So I know with this audience, I don't need to talk about the environmental impacts of data centers, and I think we've all felt the economic impacts as utility customers. But there's another angle that I would encourage you to think about in terms of how data centers are impacting Maryland and, in fact, other states, and that is in terms of their effect on our state's revenues and the money that is coming into the state of Maryland. So by way of context, back in the 2020 legislative session, the General Assembly passed legislation to create 2 tax breaks to attract data centers to come to Maryland. At the time, there weren't very many in Maryland. There were more in Virginia, certainly not the number that there are now. But legislation was brought forward and kind of sold as a regional competitiveness measure to try to grow this industry in the state of Maryland. And what ultimately passed were 2 tax breaks. One was statewide in nature, and that exempted from our state sales tax all of the physical stuff that basically a data center needs to buy to get up and going. So that's everything from the NVIDIA chips to the racks to the software that's running all of that equipment, to the cooling and ventilation systems, just like all of the the physical things that go into a data center. And for data centers of a certain size that promise to create a certain number of jobs over a certain period of time that paid a certain amount, they could get this sales tax exemption. And fast forward to today, there are 7 data centers in Maryland, which is a small subset of the total number of data centers that we know. I believe the number currently is 44 that are operating in the state of Maryland, but there are 7 that are receiving that statewide tax break. Now, the second thing that law from 2020 did was allowed local governments, county governments specifically, to offer an additional tax break for data centers. In this case, it is a tax that probably most people on this call are not familiar with, the personal property tax. It's a tax that as individuals we don't pay, but businesses do. And it is an annual tax on basically all the physical things that their business owns, everything from computers to office equipment to everything that physically is in a data center. So 3 counties to date have created that additional tax break. That's Anne Arundel, Howard, and Prince George's counties. I mentioned at the top here that I have concerns about what these tax breaks are actually doing to Maryland state budget. And I will say that this is an area, unfortunately, where we don't actually have an estimate of what the impacts are to our state's budget. I've been on the House Ways and Means Committee. This will be my 8th session there, and we look at a lot of tax incentives and tax breaks potentially, especially for businesses. And the question that I'm always thinking as we evaluate these things are, well, how much is it going to cost? And then what potential benefits what we see for the state. And there are some of these tax breaks where it pencils out and it works. And unfortunately, there are others like this one where we don't have good information. We don't have to look far, though, to be pretty concerned about what the potential impacts might be in terms of foregone state revenues, because Maryland is one of 32 states that have similar, but not necessarily identical, tax incentives for the development of data centers. And the costs really are escalating in these other states. Thankfully, most of these states aren't like Maryland. They actually do collect this data and are publicly reporting that information. So I'll give you a few examples here. Illinois also created their tax breaks for data centers back in 2020, so same year as Maryland. Initially, they thought it would cost them $10 million a year. Well, as of 2024, it was costing them $370 million a year. So that's a pretty significant escalation. State of Texas, 2 years ago, thought that they would be spending $130 million a year on data center tax breaks last year. The actual cost was $1 billion. And our neighbors in Virginia went from spending $81 million a few years ago to $1.6 billion this fiscal year. And I'll note that that is more than double what they spent the year before. And that news just broke in recent days. So these are pretty alarming trends about what is happening in other places. Again, we don't have the numbers here in Maryland, but I think that information that is playing out in state after state across the country is enough for us to want to pump the brakes on all of this. So what my legislation does very simply is it just ends these two tax breaks, the statewide tax break and ends the ability for counties to offer a local tax breaks for data centers. If data centers want to exist, and I'll say I'm fully supportive of the other legislative efforts that my colleagues are putting in this session, they should pay their full freight. They shouldn't get a discount from taxpayers, especially when they are driving up our utility bills, and especially in a year when we are facing a significant budget deficit again. So that is the bill in a nutshell, and I'll give you all back some time.
Yeah, well, thank you, Delegate. And actually, I have a question from a colleague of yours. Delegate Hutchinson asks, why you said there's 40 data centers in Maryland currently and only 3 are taking advantage of the tax breaks. Why are the other 37 not taking advantage of them? Do you have any idea?
7 are getting the break now. Probably some of them existed before the tax break existed. Others may be too small in terms of the size of the data center. Certainly in the early days of the data center, there was some feedback from the industry that the number of jobs that needed to be created just maybe was not feasible. We've certainly seen that play out in Virginia. So I think some of the metrics there, I think probably are contributing to this. But I would just, flip this on its head and say, okay, only 7 are getting the break, yet we've still gotten whatever the math works out to 30 some other data centers in the state that we have not subsidized using state revenues.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So I will point out that you have a number of questions in the Q&A feature. If you don't mind hanging out for a little bit and responding to those, I'm sure the audience would appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for being here today. All right, we're going to moving on to our next legislator speaking here. It's a first timer, I believe, to the annual Climate Environmental Legislative Summit. Today we have Delegate Vogel joining us. He has represented Maryland's District 17 since 2023. And serves as the Deputy Majority Whip in the House of Delegates. On the Ways and Means Committee, including the Gaming Subcommittee, he champions smart investments in climate startups and innovative solutions for a greener future. I'm excited to hear what you have to say today, Delegate Vogel, about the Climate Navigator program. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. It's not letting me turn my camera on. It says the host has disabled it.
We will fix that for you.
Way to fix that.
Yeah,
I can get started. In the meantime, you guys aren't missing anything if you can't see my face, but hopefully we'll get that fixed. Well, thank you, Matt, and thanks to, let's see. Okay, host has asked you to, great. Hey, everyone. I'm in the car running from event to event, but really looking forward to this conversation. And just thank you all for being on this call and for your leadership and advocacy. I ran for the legislature in part because of the fact that I feel like we need to take on the climate crisis with greater urgency. And thanks to your leadership, I think Maryland is already a national leader and there's a lot more work to be done. And I'm grateful to all my colleagues who have been presenting over the course of the day today on a number of important initiatives that I look forward to supporting this legislative session. Like Matt mentioned, most of my focus on the climate front in the legislature has been bringing together the economic opportunity that exists in the climate space and finding ways to leverage climate as a way to create jobs and invest in our economy while also taking on the climate crisis. I was proud to work on the Climate Tech Founders Fund, which together with the Clean Energy Center, MCEC, and MEIA, we got passed a few years ago now, investing millions of dollars in climate tech startups across the state. I've had the opportunity to visit several of them, and they're just doing incredible work at addressing the climate crisis while also creating jobs and creating revenue here for our state at a time when we need more economic growth and economic momentum. The bill that I'm introducing this year on energy performance contracts, the Climate Navigators program, and I see a representative here, Pam Powers from MCEC, who can share. If I'm missing anything, Pam, please feel free to jump in. But this bill actually originated at one of the roundtables that occurred at the MCEC summit last year. We were talking about energy performance contracts and the opportunity that they present for our state. EPCs, to make it very simple, I'm sure there's folks listening today who are way more knowledgeable on the details and intricacies of EPCs. But the basic idea is that there's companies that will form these agreements with either public agencies or private sector businesses as well. The idea being that they make upfront investments in energy efficiency programs and renovations needed to ensure greater energy efficiency and meet better climate standards, with the understanding that over time, that'll then lead to lower costs for those businesses or agencies. And then the agreement is that they will pay back part of those savings to the company that they made the EPC agreement with initially. So the challenge is that for a lot of our municipalities in particular across the state, they really lack that technical assistance to be able to enter into those energy performance contracts, not to mention the technical support needed and the capacity needed to be able to apply for federal funding when that's available, which we hope it will be again to the extent we saw during the Biden administration very soon. But when that funding does become available, that's also a challenge for some of our smaller municipalities that just don't have the technical capacity in-house or the capacity in-house of staff to be able to apply for all those programs, or in this case, form the energy performance contract agreements. And just to quickly go over the potential savings here that we got from the Department of General Services in the state of Maryland. They entered into an energy performance contract for the Spring Grove Hospital Center in Cannonsville, Maryland, and that saved taxpayers $2.7 million in utility and operational savings over 13 years, and significantly reduced emissions as well. So what this bill does is, through the Maryland Clean Energy Center, establish climate navigators that are going to be regionally focused in different parts of the state. There's one for Allegheny and Frederick County and Garrett County and Washington County, one for Calvert and the surrounding counties, one for Caroline County, one for Montgomery County, one for Anne Arundel County and some of the Eastern Shore counties, one for Prince George's County, one for Baltimore County, and one for Baltimore City. And these climate navigators would be fully focused on supporting municipalities and state, local agencies in these areas in particular at forming energy performance contracts. And then again, when the funding becomes available, seeking different grant programs that exist to support our local municipalities in particular, our school districts and other local county agencies at being able to fully maximize their energy efficiency programming and make the renovations necessary and get the funding to make the renovations necessary, which will not only save them money, save taxpayers money, but also help us reduce emissions across the state. Pam, I miss anything?
Sorry, I couldn't hit my mute button. I think you covered everything. You did a great job. Thank you.
That's great. Sounds like a good team there then. Thank you, Delegate Vogel, for this important resource that seems that so many will be able to benefit from it if this gets passed through the legislative session. So again, thanks for your leadership on this. Thanks for your desire to help protect Marylanders and the climate against the climate crisis. And we really look forward to working with you as the advocacy community on getting this bill moved forward.
And thank you all so much. And like I always say when I'm speaking to any climate advocates, future generations are thanking you for the work that you're doing right now. So thank you so much.
That's great. We have one question that came in the chat. I don't know if you can see it on your phone, Delegate. If not, Pam, hopefully you can address that.
I don't see it.
All right, I'll let you guys work through that. And then we're going to get moving to our next presenter here, Delegate Edelson, who's come in for his second year at the summit, I believe. I remember introducing you last year, and it was a pleasure, and it also is again this year. So, Delegate Edelson, an attorney, has represented Baltimore City's District 46 since 2023. He serves on the House Appropriations Committee and is vice chair of its Transportation and Environment Subcommittee, a really important committee here. A proven leader, Delegate Edelson championed the Fair Fares Act and the Lots Funding Act, ensuring equitable access to transportation across Maryland. He continues fighting for more sustainable, fair, and connected future for all residents. And with that, Delegate Edelson, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. It is great to be with you all again. For some reason, I feel like this is my third year at the summit, but maybe my second. Time's still a bit of a flat circle for me. But it's great to see everybody again. I am so excited to let you know that myself and Senator Shelley Heddleman will be reintroducing the TCA, Transportation and Climate Alignment Act, again this year. I know that this is a priority bill for so many of our incredible environmental organizations, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, CCAN, and many others. With your support, I am confident that we will be able to get it over the finish line this year. We were very, very close in the Senate last year. We've been working with some incredible partners to build up the momentum again for the bill this year. So just to talk about a couple of the facts and details of the bill to sort of remind everybody what this one does. This is the bill that really looks at our long range significant infrastructure projects within the CTP, the Consolidated Transportation Program set about by MDOT, the Department of Transportation, and this will really focus and realign our investments in the Consolidated Transportation Program on things like public transit, walking, biking infrastructure, solar, TOD, as opposed to just building out this massive, expansive network of highways that we've been doing for decades that at the end of the day has really destroyed our rural communities. It's resulted in more congestion, more frustration with people on our roads, more accidents and unfortunately fatalities, and of course, much more pollution. And so we're trying to reset that mentality and have our friends at MDOT really working on focusing our investments on things that are going to help people get from A to B, as opposed to just focusing our policies on vehicles. And so it's going to do things like save people time from sitting in traffic, as you can see. It's going to give people more affordable options to get to work, to school, to other destinations, and critically, as my good friend Joe Vogel just mentioned, reduce harmful pollution, which our future generations are going to be extremely thankful for. And it's going to do something that is so necessary. And I think about this every day as someone who represents District 46. I have incredible neighborhoods like Cherry Hill, Westport, Lakeland, Mount Winans, Curtis Bay, Brooklyn in my district. These are historically overburdened and underserved communities that unfortunately have been the recipients of some of our worst environmental and transportation policies over the years. They have to deal with all of the pollutants in their neighborhoods, and they don't get the benefits of an improved transportation system. And so the other critical piece of the TCA is that it's going to really focus our investments in our overburdened and underserved communities. A couple nuts and bolts on how it works is that it will have MDOT, the Department of Transportation, do a assessment on the greenhouse gas emissions increases, the VMT increases of any new massive, highway expansion projects over $100 million, and it will then have them take that information and actualize it in a real way. So if the assessment shows that the project is going to have a net effect of increasing greenhouse gas emissions, then it will require them to either slow down the project, halt the project, alter the project so that it doesn't have the same greenhouse gas emissions impact, or build a sister project. And there's a whole list of potential sister projects that will result in netting out the greenhouse gas emissions as a result of the project that they are building. And obviously, this can be things like transit projects, walking and biking infrastructure, solar projects, TOD, land use, all of these things that will ultimately focus us in a better direction. So it really has like these two conceptual pieces to it. One is that it'll have MDOT doing the assessments on these projects so that we as legislators and stakeholders can have the real data to understand exactly how these projects are going to impact our climate. But two, it's going to automatically have the effect of bumping projects up in the priority chain that will lessen the climate pollutant impact of many of our projects. So this is going to help our rural communities. I've spoken to so many folks in rural communities that have ADA accessibility projects and downtown networks that they're trying to rebuild with walking and biking infrastructure and things that they're trying to do to help connect people to their downtowns that they're trying to revitalize. And these projects just cannot get high enough in the priority list to get funding in our CTP. And these folks are so excited to know that if we can pass the TCA, it is these kinds of projects that will get higher up in the priority list and get funding, because they will be doing exactly what the TCA is looking to have us do and move closer towards projects across the CTP, frankly, major expansion projects, but also everything in the minor program that all has this mindset of, are we helping to move Marylanders? Are we making it easier for people to get around? Are we reducing car expenses? Are we reducing congestion? Are we reducing roadway fatalities and injuries? And are we reducing pollution? And in so doing, it's also going to have significant benefits on job opportunities and on economic development, because you're going to have a lot more people who can access those jobs and investment coming into our neighborhoods that wouldn't have happened before. And as Lindsay just popped up in the chat, there was a recent op-ed in Maryland Matters that makes the public health case for the TCA. So there's so many reasons, as you all know, for us to be getting big, important, meaty pieces of legislation like this over the finish line and onto the governor's desk for signature, because they will make Maryland a better state for generations to come. And that's why I'm so excited to work on it with Senator Hettleman and with all of you. I'm hoping this is the final year that we have to work on it, because this is the year that we get it over the finish line, get it signed and into law and make it happen. But if it isn't, I commit to you that I will be doing this until we get it signed by the governor.
I appreciate that. I like a good, strong commitment like that and hard work put behind it. That means a lot. Another bill that we'll see again this year, and I see Lindsay's on, and I just want to give Lindsay a chance to see if she wants to pop on and say anything. I see that she put the link in the chat there for the Maryland Matters article. Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks so much. The only thing I'll add is that this legislation was modeled after bills that successfully passed in Minnesota and Colorado. And in Colorado, some of the benefits is it actually shifted investment away from 2 highway expansion projects to 5 bus rapid transit projects in the Denver area. And it's projected to save commuters $40 billion by 2050. So lots of benefits that consumers will see as well from this.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much for bringing this legislation forward and for helping all of us understand how we can get involved, what the impacts of this are and the benefits to Marylanders if this were to pass. I think it's really important that we recognize those. So moving on to our next speaker, we have Senator Brooks joining us with about 3 pieces of legislation today. Senator Brooks has represented Maryland's District 10 since 2023 and serves on the Senate Education, Energy, and Environment Committee, one that many of us advocates are familiar with. A U.S. Army veteran and a Vietnam Service Medal recipient, Senator Brooks championed permanent community solar programs for low-income residents and advanced native plant legislation. He remains focused on education, energy, and building stronger communities. While we wait for Senator Brooks to see if we can actually get him here today, I'm going to jump around on his bills a little bit while we have the advocates here to help move those. And so we're first going to start with, since I see Drew Schmidt-Perkins joining us, we're going to start with the septic bill, if you don't mind, Drew. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Love talking about septics, the silent polluter of the Chesapeake Bay and our waterways. We're thrilled that Senator Brooks has joined Delegate Guyton to sponsor a bill that would simply require that inspections are done of septic systems whenever they're being sold or between renters. Septic systems are responsible for in 17 counties for the majority of nitrogen pollution. And yes, I'm joined by my granddaughter behind me. And I mean, it's outweighing sewage treatment plants now. It's a lot of pollution. It's sort of the hidden polluter of the Chesapeake Bay. So this bill would just say, hey, you got to get these systems inspected. And if there's a problem, you have to get them fixed. We just got the bill numbers. And of course, I don't have them in front of me. Their bills were pre-filed. And we're really, it almost made it through last year, almost 10 minutes before the end of session. It just, a question was asked and they pulled it down. So this year we're very hopeful that we'll actually get through so that we can begin to find the secret septic problems and get them fixed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Drew. I heard it once said that the septic system is your most important, what am I trying to say? Your most important system in your house that you never see, that you never really know what's going on with. And so,
Most
I like this
expensive
bill.
appliance. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I like about this bill is when you put it on the sales of properties or you hinge it on that, that's when you have motivated people to fix it, right? When you really want to see when a owner wants to see their property change over or the buyer wants to see it, you're going to see some motivation to actually make this or to get these septics fixed upon that sale. So I think it's a really really sensible piece of legislation, and I hope this year means we can get it across the finish line. So thank you.
Always hopeful.
Yeah,
Yep.
thanks for all
So
your work
join
on.
Team Septics. We have a lot of fun working on septic issues because you can only do it if you're having fun.
Yeah, and just actually for a plug for Team Septic, anybody on the program today who has any questions or is interested in more of the work that Team Septic is doing, please go ahead and reach out to Drew Schmidt Perkins. Drew, if you wouldn't mind throwing your email in the chat, that would really help out a lot. Yeah, great. We're going to jump back here, Bill, and one that I think many of us are familiar with that we're going to ask Martha Ainsworth if she wouldn't mind talking about is the Maryland Bottle Bill that Senator Brooks is sponsoring and bringing back this year. I'll turn it over to Martha to talk about this, please.
Well, thanks very much for inviting us to do this, and thrilled to be here today. The Maryland Bottle Bill, the objective is to reduce litter and plastic pollution. And keep in mind that we've known for many, many years that plastic affects the wildlife, right? We know plastic affects wildlife, but over the last year, we've learned some very alarming things about plastic in our bodies, including in our brains. It's accumulating. And Maryland has been trying to get a bottle bill since the 1970s. You can believe that. And we are the closest we've ever been to getting this thing passed. And I think it's being propelled by our concern about plastic pollution and what it's going to do to human beings. So let me just say that more than 5.5 billion beverage containers are sold in Maryland annually, and only about a quarter of them are being captured for recycling. So the rest are going into the environment, incinerators, landfills, and litter. It's a wasted, besides what I just said about human health and the environment, it's also wasted energy and resources because we're actually burying or burning a lot of resources that could have been reused. And it saves a lot of greenhouse gas emissions if you reuse the materials as opposed to using virgin materials. Okay, next slide. All right. So it's really quite simple. A small refundable deposit is added to the price of beverages in glass, plastic, and metal beverage containers. Let me just say that this is one of the most it will be the most comprehensive bottle bill in the United States. There are already 10 states that have these bills, but they're more limited in scope. Deposits refunded when their containers are returned to a convenient retailer. Think about it as buying the beverage and borrowing the container, and we get the containers back because there's a refundable deposit. Many of you may remember when you were kids, at least if you're my generation, collecting the glass bottles off the side of out the litter and getting money for them. Anyway, that's the general idea. Back then we had reusable glass beverage containers that we refilled. Now we have single-use plastic, aluminum, and glass beverage containers. And so we want eventually to get back to that. But this bill is about making sure they get collected and they're not littered. So 60 states, countries, and territories have these active deposit systems. The ones most recently in Europe were motivated by their single-use plastic directive. They need to get at least 90% of plastic PET bottles returned by 2029. And so a lot of them are adopting laws like this. So we have a lot of experience now about what's happening in Europe and the effectiveness of these programs in in reducing plastic litter. So, okay, next slide, please. So this bill, when passed, will recover 3.6 billion more containers a year, 2.3 billion of which are plastic. We're going to have a reduction in litter, plastic, and microplastic pollution. And keep in mind, this is not the only thing we have to do to get rid of microplastic pollution, but it is the lowest hanging fruit. We'll get high quality food grade materials. The beverage containers will not be commingled with stuff in the curbside bin, detergents, and other stuff. It will be suitable for closed loop recycling to other beverage containers. There's going to be a lot of cost savings for local governments and taxpayers because this program is entirely funded by beverage companies. In fact, they refund, excuse me, Maryland Department of Environment has oversight, but it's actually implemented and financed by a beverage container stewardship organization. All manufacturers importing these beverages into Maryland have to join, and they have to pay for the whole shebang. They also get the materials that they collect to sell in the market, and that goes back into the program. All deposits that aren't returned because people don't care about them, perhaps in some cases, all those unredeemed deposits will also go back into the program. They don't go back to the beverage producers. So over on the right, I just wanted to show you how high the collection rates in the European deposit return systems are. This is what we hope to achieve. We have a relatively high deposit like most of these other countries, and we expect to get at least 90% back. This is going to be the only program I'm aware of where the target is enforceable. The Beverage Container Stewardship Organization has to get to 90%, or they pay the prevailing deposit level as a penalty for every single container short of the 90% target. So we're very confident we'll get 90% back, which would be very good for all, probably higher than the other U.S. states. Let's just say that we had incredible momentum in 2025. We were so happy. First, the statewide poll found that 90% of the registered voters in Maryland support a bottle bill with a 10-cent deposit that's refundable and paid for by the beverage companies and not taxpayers. We got support from the Maryland Municipal League. The municipalities understand now that they stand to save a lot of money by this because a certain share of all their waste stream and recycling stream and the collection of litter is going to be taken over by the beverage or prevented by the beverage companies that finance it. We had an important amendment this year, the cost of processing redeemable containers that people nevertheless put in their curbside bin and they don't get the money back. Those would go into the materials recycling facility. They will be reimbursed. The recycling facility will be reimbursed for the processing of those containers that were redeemable. So that was a major amendment that the Environment and Transportation Committee added. It was passed by the Environment and Transportation Committee. It stopped short of getting to the floor because there was no vote in Economic Matters. And the other good news is that the Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging bill that passed last year, SB 901, had new language in it that stated that passage of that bill would not preclude the passage of a separate beverage container deposit system, and that both are passed. They will work, collaboratively to get the best outcome. So that, in a nutshell, is the story. We're really looking forward. We're making great progress, and we hope to make great progress this year. It will be challenging because it's an election year, but we really have a lot of momentum now. and a lot of public support.
Yeah, thank you, Martha, and thanks for representing this bill for so many years and being a great advocate for it. We do have a couple questions before we move, and Senator Brooks, thanks for joining us.
Oh, sure.
We covered your septic bill and the bottle bill now. We're going to wrap up here, and then I'm going to actually turn it back over to you to cover your other bills, if you don't mind. And so, Martha, while I have you, or Senator Brooks, if you want to answer, the question I have about the bottle bill is, of the 10 states in the US who have a similar bill, how many of them started their recycling with that versus had to transition from a current recycling program to this other program? And I'm wondering about the behavior change and the infrastructure change that's needed for such a transition.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Those programs in the other 10 states were launched, well, as early as the early 1970s. That was before we had curbside recycling. And curbside recycling has come along and it's done a lot, but you can't recycle what you can't collect. So, and about the best that they can do is get 40% of the beverage containers or so, because people consume beverages away from home. Now, even the European countries have found that they can't really get to 90% redemption of the PET bottles without a deposit that's refundable. So the best practice is to have both. You can get much higher return of beverage containers. And this deals with plastic pollution. We're going to prevent a lot of plastic going into the Chesapeake Bay and breaking down to microplastics from this bill. And I think that has really changed the discussion around the bottle bills. People are determined to at least cut off that source of plastic pollution.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really important, like PFAS and microplastics. Those are two really big issues that need, every sort of effort to really attack and address. I have one more question on the bottle bill here. What keeps the retailer from simply putting the bottle after it is returned into the landfill or trash?
So basically what they have now, this is not your grandparents' bottle bill. It's collected usually through some type of technology at a retailer, but the retailer themselves isn't necessarily handling it. So it would go into a reverse vending machine. These are the machines where you can feed them in one at a time. They verify they had a deposit, and then you get a script that you can cash in at the retailer at the checkout to get your money back. Or, a couple of pictures ago, there was a picture of the Clink bag drop. So in that case, you put all your containers in a bag, you have an account, you have your own barcode, you put it in that little trailer, and in 2 days, all your refunds are put in your account. They can figure out exactly how many refunds everybody deserves based on what they put in their bag. So it's the retailer doesn't really handle your return in the system, but the most convenient, one of the reasons these European systems have such a high return rate is because they're almost all completely returned to retail. Some of the US ones that started earlier, there's a lower retailer participation rate, so it's not as easy to return them. So they don't get quite as high as this.
Yeah. Well, great.
Yeah, Matt, if I can add on to that too. Now, there's a value to these that's been added on to the material. So now, if the retailer were to just go ahead and toss it, he's throwing away money.
Right.
So, and I don't think too many retailers want to do that. So yeah, the mere fact that there's a value on that now, and it's something that's like a commodity. It can be redeemed, and then money's collected for that. So that makes it a little bit more attractive for people to want to redeem them and then collect whatever funds that has been deposited around them. Yeah, so.
Sounds like a great incentive structure there. So I want to get to your other bill, Senator. And so, Martha, there are actually a few more questions in the Q&A about the bottle bill, if you don't mind heading over there and answering those. And then, Senator Brooks, I want to take us back a little bit here, and I want to hear about the property tax credit, retail service stations conversions. How about?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah, this bill primarily, what it does, it allows individuals to get a property tax credit if they were to convert those locations into a different retail type service or some type of residential use, the bill would authorize the state to pay the local jurisdiction 50% of whatever ongoing taxes that would have been collected on that property. And it aims to help offset the cost of removing underground fuel storages and to make that idle property producing, So that's the primary goal there. And then in Baltimore County, as well as Baltimore City, there are numerous service stations that close down, and then the property just becomes idle. So we're trying to remove trying to make those particular properties, put them back into service in one way or another, not necessarily gas stations, but at the same time, retail property and income producing. And that's the intent behind the bill.
Yeah, that's great. And I can really understand and see the value in this promoting infill, right? Especially in rural areas where we're seeing development pressures outside, looking at these vacant retail service areas and converting them into actually developable properties is a great thing. And
Right.
and the incentives that are offered here for the gas tanks and other things to remove are often a huge barrier to getting that there. So I think it's well thought out, and thanks for that.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to move now to your next one. Don't mind me as I jump over to
Right.
this is going to be the GITS bill, which I'll just warn you, this has been brought up a lot. A lot of people are excited about this.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead and why don't you dig into this for us?
Right, yeah, this is what we call the grid enhancement technology bills. And primarily what we want the utility companies to do is to see what other utilization that can be done via software, via reconductoring, to make sure that we can utilize all of those particular options prior to installing more 500 kilovolts power lines, coming down from wherever. Like right now, we had some big concerns about the MPRP, Maryland, bringing those 500 kilovolt towers from Pennsylvania all the way down to Frederick County, and that's going to be at the expense of the taxpayers. So there are things that we can do to perhaps get the same amount of power without installing those particular infrastructure enhancement, those particular infrastructure costs, and still be able to generate the same, transmit the same amount of electron. That's a good thing. We've got what they call a dynamic line rating, and what that does, that measures the ambient condition of and temperature of a line, and in real time capacity, and that sometimes they can increase the capacity of the lines up to 50%, on cold or windy days. Then you've got advanced power flow controls. What that does, that's hardware and software that can reroute power flows to optimize that line utilization to avoid overflows on some lines, and at the same time the underutilization of other lines. Then you've got topology optimization. That's software that is used to track the best routes and the combination of lines when transferring power. And this software then can proactively alter just where the better flow of those particular electrons. And then last but not least, that advanced reconductoring. And that's where you replacing those conductors with advanced conductors, and you're just replacing the lines, and sometimes you can get twice the capacity as what you were getting before. So we just want the companies to utilize all of these particular options prior to just running, installing more high voltage towers, because those particular costs, the ratepayers are saddled with that for 40, 50, however many years, and they are not, those particular costs are not, they're amortized. over the life of that loan, as opposed to normal business entities. They recover that cost through depreciation, but these are amortized. So it's like you're paying for a house for 60 years, 40 to 50 or 60 years. So the goal here is try to mitigate some of the increases on the ratepayers.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the push to look for alternatives before we settle on, what could be some of the mistakes we've done in the past. As you said, financially, the burdens that have been carried because of some of this technology, that if we were only to see and recognize the new technology and using that forward, we may have been able to minimize some of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Well, Senator Brooks, thank you so much for joining us. I'm always impressed with the breadth of legislation that you bring forward every year, and I'm excited to see how we can work together with the advocacy community on the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Matt. Good enough.
Great.
All right.
All right. And so moving in, we're going to do one more talk here on legislation before we do a deep dive on nuclear energy here in Maryland. And inviting back to the stage my friend here, Emily Scar. Emily is the Senior Director of Maryland PIRG. I gave her introduction earlier, so I'm going to let you just jump right into it, Emily, if that's good with you.
Sure. Happy to be back. I hope you all are doing well after many hours. It's still raining here in Baltimore, so a perfect day to be staring at our screens. So I wanted to take a few minutes to run through a handful of utility oversight bills. I haven't seen all of these, but I have had some conversations with the sponsors. So I'm going to do my best to relay what I know, since not all these sponsors were able to be here today. And I'm happy to follow up or encourage you to reach out to them if you're interested in one of their bills. Maryland PIRG is still figuring out exactly everything we're supporting ourselves. But one thing is clear, if you heard my presentation earlier, we really need to hold our investor-owned utilities accountable and make sure they're properly regulated in order to ensure that they provide safe, affordable, and reliable energy, and make sure they can serve as good partners as we smooth the transition to clean energy for home heating and cooling. And unfortunately, wasteful spending from our utilities that has led to these rapidly rising rates and pressure on our rates means there's just less financial opportunity to invest in things we actually want to invest in clean energy, in the transition, in energy efficiency. All of it is sort of being pushed back against because people just can't afford their bills. So there's a handful of bills that are looking to direct the PSC to hold the utilities more accountable, or to, in statute, just hold the utilities more accountable, that I'm going to run through. The first is Breaking Stride. This is from Delegate Boafo. So I mentioned earlier, last year we passed the Ratepayer Protection Act, which adds consumer protections to the Stride law and to all gas capital spending. Delegate Boafo is looking to go a step further to ensure we aren't spending wastefully on our gas pipeline expansion and new gas pipes. So what the bill does is builds on what the Ratepayer Protection Act does last year by repealing the Stride statute entirely. Doing that would end the ability for gas utilities to add a surcharge to customers' bills for their Stride programs. He's also considering adding language to completely prohibit gas pipeline spending to be eligible for advanced recovery or accelerated recovery, for gas capital spending. So that would basically say you can't get the spending approved in advance through a multi-year rate plan either. So that would sort of shift the incentive for wasteful spending to ensure that all spending was the investors are taking the risk and then have to justify that spending before it can be passed on to ratepayers. And importantly, the bill will also maintain the progress we made last year, that language that requires gas capital spending to demonstrate cost effectiveness, as well as the utilities looking at alternatives to replacement, including repair, relining, or non-pipeline alternatives, including electrification. So that's the first bill. The next is lowering utility rate of return. I believe this is going to be Delegate Johnson's bill. The bill would direct the Public Service Commission to lower the return on investment for investor-owned utilities. I mentioned earlier that it varies, different types of debt, different types of investment, but the high return rates that utilities are getting for capital investments, working to bring that down to sort of right-size their profits in a way based with what the public needs in the 20th century. We don't need them to be, as Laurel always says, Bob the Builder is just massively building right now, especially on some projects. The third bill is banning utility campaign contributions. And this is going to be Delegate Baylor. According to the State Board of Elections, Exelon and its subsidiaries donated $125,000 to Maryland candidates in 2025, second only to the Maryland Retailers Association. Maryland PIRG supports banning all corporate campaign donations directly to candidates, as many states already do and is already prohibited by the federal government. But utilities are uniquely worth restricting. Investor-owned utilities are in a position where the state has direct control over how much profit they are authorized to deliver to their shareholders, right? It's not capitalism in this sense. They don't have competition. We pay for it. So this dynamic makes utilities' political dealings more vulnerable to corruption, or certainly the perception of corruption in the public's eye, which is a good reason to be watchful of their political spending and to restrict their ability to donate directly to candidates. In fact, from 1935 until 2005, under federal law, investor-owned utilities weren't allowed to make any donations to state-level candidates, and they're still not allowed to make contributions to federal candidates. But that law was repealed in 2005. So, I think it's an interesting time to look at this and figure out, can we restrict this type of spending? And there's precedent for it in Maryland. There are already some restrictions on certain online gaming or I think it's online lottery operators from making donations to political candidates. The fourth bill is capping how much utilities can charge ratepayers for executive pay and bonuses. This is going to be Senator Hester and Delegate Crosby. It was pre-filed, so it's HB1 and SB2, which is always a good sign and shows that the leadership of both chambers are taking a really strong look at the legislation. What this would do is add restrictions to how much, again, these utilities can pay their executives and certain staff. I think it caps it at about 110% of what public service commissioners make right now, as well as prohibiting types of bonuses. So they can't just give them extra money through bonuses either. To be clear, they can still pay their staff whatever they want. It's just that they cannot pass those giant salaries onto ratepayers onto our bills. They will have to, if they're going above this 110%, they would have to pay for that out of shareholder profits. There's some additional language in this bill because I just got to take a look at it around directing the PSC to look at some other non-required expenses and sort of rein those in, or directing the utilities, I think, to look at some other expenses. I have to look more closely, but it's building on what happened last year. We were prohibiting the utilities from passing on trade association dues and private jets to ratepayers, just continuing to look and restrict which type of expenses they're allowed to charge to us. And then I'll add one more. From Delegate Allen, he's got a bill to study restructuring Maryland's electric utility industry and fully to create a task force to do a study on alternatives to how we're running our utilities right now. So those are just 5 bills. As everyone knows, energy and affordability is such a big issue now. There could be more that are coming, but those are 5 that have hit my radar and worth people paying attention to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, as always, for such a great overview. I'm really always impressed with how much you have your hands on and how much you're able to work on. I don't know when you sleep, but thanks for all you bring to the table, Emily, and for all the support you have on all this legislation. It really means a lot.
Thank you, and have fun talking about nuclear too.
Yeah, we will. Awesome. So with that segue, that actually ends our legislation portion of the summit here. And so, as you can tell, today's climate focus was really hitting on utility accountability, ratepayers, and rates to our increasing rates to our ratepayers. Data centers. Can we say data centers anymore? Data centers. They're everywhere. And rightfully so. They're being a focus of a lot of policy. And then also transportation, a huge driver of climate change is the emissions from transportation. And so it's great to see innovative ways of thinking around that. Our next topic here is diving into an energy source, one that we're starting to hear a lot more about, and one that I think a lot of Marylanders will benefit from learning about here. And so joining us today is Tim Judson. Tim has served as the executive director of the Nuclear Information and Resource Service since 2014. After joining as associate director in 2013, he leads NIRS work on nuclear energy and climate issues, and has authored reports on nuclear bailouts and sustainable energy and helped close the Vermont Yankee reactor as chair of the Citizens Awareness Network. Tim also co-founded the New York Alliances for a Green Economy. So Tim, I'm excited to have you here today talking with us. And it's okay, I'm going to turn it over to you. And anytime you need to advance the slides, go ahead and let me know. And if you see me pop on for any reason, it's because we have a timely question that I want to try to get in there as we're moving. So Tim, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And then thanks to everybody for being here and for having me today. So I've been asked to cover a lot of different topics here. And so I'm going to move pretty fast through some of these slides, just to make sure that we've got enough room or enough time for Q&A at the end. But why don't we just dive right in? Let's go to the next slide. So just as a sort of general overview, so nuclear power, has been a stagnant industry in the U.S. for several decades now. It provides about 17.8% of the electricity in the country as of 2024, and that share is probably declining. It's from a peak of providing about 22.5% in the mid-1990s. And that, and as I think all are sort of aware that, the growth of renewables has been really extraordinary. And, the renewables are providing about 25% of the electricity in the country, just by comparison. But what I mean by the industry has been stagnant is also that we have essentially the world's oldest fleet of nuclear power plants in the world at over 43 years on average, and a growing percentage of reactors that are over 50 years, which is really unprecedented territory. No nuclear plants in the world have ever operated for as long as they are, as the oldest reactors are today. Next slide. So Maryland is squarely within, that sort of, demographic for nuclear energy. We have one nuclear power plant at Calvert Cliffs over on the Western Shore, which is, consists of two reactors, two pressurized water reactors that are each about 50 years old currently. It generates about 14.8 million megawatt hours a year, which is about 25% of Maryland's annual electricity consumption. Sometimes you hear larger percentages, but that's because of the declining amount of electricity that's generated in Maryland. Calvert Cliffs has been a growing percentage of the power that is generated in Maryland. But the plant consumes about 3 billion gallons of water a day, which is which is essentially more water withdrawn from the bay every day than all other industrial users of the bay combined. And there's about more than 1,700 metric tons of irradiated fuel, or what's commonly called nuclear waste, that is stored on site. Next slide. And we have been paying for this plant, for all of these 50 years, but just in the last, quarter century, the amount of subsidies that have gone into Calvert Cliffs operations, both state, federal, and local, has been over $3 billion. And that's actually increasing now since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and this federal nuclear production credit has gone into effect, which is, could provide essentially $220 million a year of taxpayer revenues from the federal government to Calvert Cliffs. And there's been some legislative proposals in the last couple of years to essentially backstop that federal subsidy after it expires in 2032 with a state program that, basically the equivalent amount. So in a sense, if those policies were to go into place, then direct ratepayer subsidies from Marylanders would be going into the operations of Calvert Cliffs. And this is, typical of what's, the history of the industry. Nuclear power is pound for pound the most heavily subsidized energy source over the last 70 years. And that's from a variety of sources, which I could go into later. But the $716 million that Maryland ratepayers essentially bailed out Calvert Cliffs when deregulation happened in the late 90s was part of a national trend in which tens of billions of ratepayer dollars were spent to bail out reactors that were going into deregulation. Next slide. So also because Calvert Cliffs is so old, the initial 40-year license for the reactor was already extended to 60 years. Those expire in the mid-2030s. And so Constellation is now planning to try to relicense those reactors again, out to 80 years of operation into the mid-2050s. And this is largely a pro forma process that's administered by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission federally. There's essentially no physical inspections of these aging reactors that are required to get a license extension. Constellation will just have to show that it has what's called an aging management program to basically monitor the condition of the reactors going forward. But there won't be any sort of inspections required to be conducted in order for this next license extension to be implemented. That usually takes about 24 to 30 months for a relicensing application to be completed. But under the Trump administration's policy through the executive orders that were issued last year, that's going to be capped at 12 months to review this. The costs for Constellation are, fairly minimal in terms of nuclear costs. They're going to spend probably several $1 million preparing the application. But they'll also incur regulatory fees for the agency's time to review the application. But there won't, unless there's legal challenges to the license extension, they won't be incurring much in the way of legal costs. And like I said, because there's no inspections required, there's also no capital investments that are necessary to get the license extension. But again, because Calvert Cliffs is such an old plant, there could be, equipment that needs to be replaced as the operation of the reactors go forward, which could cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, depending on what repairs are required. Now, because we are in a deregulated merchant power market, Constellation is directly responsible for those costs. They don't get to just go and charge ratepayers for it. But indirectly, ratepayers and taxpayers are going to be paying for are going to continue paying for a lot of Calvert Cliffs operations through these various subsidy and financing programs. Next slide. So this, in comparison to renewable energy, is quite different. As we all know, the cost of wind and solar and now battery storage has plummeted in the last 20 years. Wind and solar and even wind and solar with storage are now the cheapest energy sources that are available. The opposite has happened with nuclear power. It's by far the most expensive and has increased in costs over the years, and that's pretty much true of the industry's track record. The cost that the Lazard, which is the chart that I'm showing here, are based on is the completion of the Vogtle 3 and 4 reactors in Georgia last year, which ended up costing $37 billion and led to an almost 24% rate increase for Georgia Power customers. Next slide. So, but as a result of these trends with renewable energy, renewable energy is growing by leaps and bounds throughout the world. You can see just globally, we're now approaching 1 million megawatt hours of renewables being deployed in each year going forward. And a similar trend is happening still in the U.S. despite the Trump administration's new policies. Where basically the equivalent of 13 new reactors worth of renewable energy came online last year. Next slide. But we do have a problem with the rate of growth being stymied essentially by this interconnection problem that I think everyone's aware of, both within PJM, but also with other, in regions throughout the country, where we have about 2,500 gigawatts, 2.5 million megawatts of renewables and storage that are backed up in these years-long interconnection queues, which are really controlled by the utilities and the transmission line owners. And so, while we're looking at large load growth from data centers and the need to basically phase out fossil fuels, we have so much renewable energy and storage, in the queues waiting for these approvals. That the decision by PJM last year to essentially prioritize deployments of fossil fuel and nuclear projects over renewable energy, is just a huge source of the problem that we're facing. Next slide. Now, these trends, with nuclear energy are really sort of just endemic to the industry's whole history. What we saw in what we call the first generation of nuclear power, which was the construction of the current generation of reactors. There were 247 reactors that were proposed, but only 130 were ever completed and operated for any period of time. So it's nearly a 50% cancellation rate of reactor construction projects in the first generation. And then, then 42 of those reactors have since been retired. The construction costs and delays in construction were endemic and actually worsened over time in the first generation, to where construction times grew to over 14 years. And the budgets were basically triple of what their original estimates were. So in some cases, they were more than 10 times their original estimates. Next slide. Now, the industry saw this sort of cliff coming where the reactors were getting older and they weren't building anymore. And so they tried to sort of gin up what they called a nuclear renaissance 20 years ago. And they got, for the first time, direct subsidies and financing from the federal government to try to sort of stimulate that through billions of dollars of loan guarantees and production credits and whatnot. And in the years after, there were 30 new reactors proposed and license applications submitted. But those quickly started to be canceled when the cost started to go up. And so only 14 of those licenses ended up being issued. Only 4 reactors started construction, and the construction of those reactors bankrupted Westinghouse before they were even half built. And so the project in South Carolina was canceled. The one in Georgia continued, but ended up being essentially 7 years late and, and $21 billion or $23 billion over budget, over the original budget. And so essentially there was, both huge cost increases and a 93% cancellation rate for nuclear projects in the last 20 years. So an even worse track record than in the first generation. So now the industry is talking about sort of new designs of reactors, breaking away from the large, what are called light water reactors, to SMRs, small modular reactors, and other what they're calling advanced reactors. But none of these reactors have a track record. Most of the companies are startups that have never built a reactor before or designed a reactor before. And while there's some of them are sort of, are getting closer to getting a construction permit, like this TerraPower project in Wyoming, they're still, none of them have actually begun construction. And so, the claims that are being made about the viability and the success of these technologies is really speculative at this point. And they cover a wide range of different types of reactors, none of which are new technologies. These technologies were investigated back in the 50s and 60s, but they were basically determined not to be, really commercially viable then. But the industry is trying to find a needle in the haystack or, some way to resuscitate itself. So next slide. But again, the costs for these new types of reactors are already going up themselves, even though they haven't even begun construction yet. So what you see is, the comparison between the costs of the Vogtle reactors in Georgia, which increased, from the time they were proposed to the time they were completed, basically by double. The cost for for some of these leading, sort of SMR or advanced reactor designs are already reaching the level of Vogel's final costs, even though they haven't begun construction yet. And what we know now is also that because of the tariffs and inflation and whatnot, that the costs of of any of these things are only going to be increasing in the next several years. So next slide. So the question is, how are these things? How would a nuclear power plant actually get built? And this is the same question that's always been, the industry's sort of biggest burden or biggest obstacle. And the reality is that essentially, it's always ratepayers and taxpayers that are going to pay for nuclear construction projects, no matter how expensive they are. And so there's what I call the sort of the laws of nuclear economics, which are, basically go like this. The nuclear construction is extremely expensive. The cost increases and delays are expected from the start. But in order to get their initial approvals to go forward, the projects have to appear to be economical at the start. So they basically, the project developers provide unrealistic cost estimates. But these projects are really huge and complicated, even for small modular reactors. These are multi-billion-dollar projects. And so mistakes happen. And the reality is that, in the utility model, those kind of mistakes can actually be profitable. So the incentives are misaligned. Nuclear reactors also take a long time to build, and banks don't want to wait, 10 or 12 years to get paid interest and, on billions of dollars in loans. And so the delays also compound the cost increases that are being passed on to ratepayers that way. Also, governments do not let utility companies go bankrupt, except in really extreme circumstances. And so cover-ups are an attractive alternative, essentially while the scandals are ongoing. And the timeline to the failure of nuclear projects outlasts election cycles. So whoever, approves, reactors, to start construction, they aren't going to be around in government, when those projects are completed and the full cost really hit ratepayers. And the reality is that ratepayers and taxpayers, we have to pay our bills. So, we don't have the option of backing out on the loans or the debts that the utility company has accumulated. And so then, that's why essentially, all of the ways nuclear plants have been financed rely on essentially ratepayers paying all the costs. Next slide. So one of the really significant features of the Next Generation Energy Act that Maryland enacted last year is that it creates a model for how to finance new reactors in a merchant power market. And the reality is that we've been insulated in Maryland for the last quarter of a century from nuclear construction projects because there's no way to recover the cost of construction by selling the power in a competitive market. And so, Constellation proposed building a third reactor at Calvert Cliffs almost 20 years ago. It never happened because the cost would have been so expensive they could have just never paid for it. So the Next Generation Act, it resolves two financing obstacles, essentially basing a nuclear procurement policy on the model that was created in the offshore wind procurement policy. It sets up basically a 30-year contract between whoever the developer is and the Maryland PSC to guarantee the recovery of the construction costs. This can also, by the way, apply to power up rates of reactors, which Constellation is planning for Calvert Cliffs as well. And it would create a non-bypassable surcharge through what they're calling zero emissions credits, which are sort of a moniker for the type of subsidy that states have been providing to nuclear plants in some cases. But it basically, the price of these credits would basically just be the gap between what the market is paying for electricity and what the approved costs are for the nuclear project. Next slide. So essentially, what the act does is it puts some responsibilities on the Maryland Energy Administration and the PSC. The MEA is directed to pursue what they call cost sharing agreements with neighboring states. It's not clear why other states would want to share Maryland's cost for an expensive nuclear plant, so I wouldn't expect much in that regard. But it directs the PSC to do some concrete things. One is that it has to accept a proposal from a developer to build new reactors, and then open a period for other developers to basically, sort of submit proposals that could be cost competitive with that, and then select the winning project. And then it has to do that twice more by 2031. And then it also tells the PSC that it has to set some pricing standards, essentially to limit, to set basically a cap for how much ratepayers could be affected by this. But the PSC has to keep those figures confidential. So we would never know essentially what an acceptable cost of a reactor the PSC would consider. Next slide. It also sets some public benefit standards for nuclear projects that have to be considered, but these are all framed as essentially the benefits of a project, not an evaluation of its other impacts, environmental impacts, environmental justice impacts, and whatnot, only to consider the benefits of a nuclear project. It does create a couple of important limitations, which is that it prohibits payments for the reactor's costs until the reactor is actually online and generating electricity. And I'll just say that I don't think that any nuclear plant in the country has been built under such a policy. Because the long construction times, ratepayers are generally charged for the cost while the construction is ongoing. But it also says that ratepayers in the state would be, quote, held harmless for cost overruns on a project. Next slide. But what this does is it creates a model for building new reactors in states with deregulated power markets. And so I sort of expect that there's going to be copycat legislation in some other states. The partial cost controls in the act are a good foresight, but they provide some false assurances. And namely, it's that the approved cost that the PSC sets can be amended if there's a cost overrun. And that is in fact what happens in every case where there has been nuclear cost overruns, is that, for instance, in Georgia, the PSC reviewed the progress on construction and the cost every 6 months for those 12 years 13 years that it was under construction. It just consistently raised the bar when Georgia Power came in and said the costs had gone. And there's nothing to prevent that from happening, under this policy either. I think another side impact of this is that the PSC is now going to be potentially tied up, having to review these nuclear proposals, which are going to be extremely complex. They're going to require a lot of staff time. That the PSC, which has, I think we all know, has limited capacity, could and should be spending on, advancing the state's renewable energy targets. So I think there's probably some misaligned priorities for the PSC in this as well. Next slide. Now, there's a lot of talk around all of this in terms of these advanced reactors or advanced nuclear. And so the question is, what is advanced nuclear? And the reality is there is no consistent definition. This is really sort of a marketing term that's been created for a wide range of reactor technologies. That include also large light water reactors, like the ones that were built in Georgia, the type of reactors that we're most familiar with, as well as SMRs, both light water SMRs and non-light water SMRs, as well as also micro reactors. These, sort of neighborhood scale, sort of megawatt to 10 megawatt style reactors. Next slide. But there's also a lot of claims being made that these reactors are inherently safer, and that's not necessarily true. There have been small reactors, using some of these same technologies, sodium coolant, graphite coolant, that have had significant releases of radiation historically and have contaminated communities and led to serious problems. And so, the fact that these reactors are smaller and use different types of technology doesn't mean that the safety of the community is going to be inherently protected. They also generally would create more nuclear waste per amount of electricity. So there was a study out of Stanford by a former nuclear regulatory commissioner that found that these new reactors could generate 2 to 30 times more radioactive waste per megawatt than the current generation of reactors do. Next slide. So, but one of the big use cases that's been talked about is to power data centers and these large load growths that are projected from AI and crypto. And so you've probably heard a lot of deals announced in the last year between various major tech companies and various nuclear companies. There's a lot of the reality is that very few of these deals actually involve providing nuclear generated electricity to data centers in the near future. In fact, there's only one major deal in which nuclear power is being provided to a data center, and that's at an Amazon data center located at a nuclear plant in northern Pennsylvania called Susquehanna. But if you go through the deals that have been talked about a lot, like the restart of the 3 Mile Island 1 reactor, which is contingent on a bunch of regulatory approvals that haven't come through, or the construction of a bunch of small modular reactors that, again, haven't been approved, aren't under construction, are years away from being built. What's very clear is that the data centers are being built today, but it's going to be years and years and years before any nuclear power plants could even be built to power them. And a lot of that is also dependent on the industry showing that it can keep costs down to an affordable level, and or the government basically sort of what they call de-risking or bailing out these projects when the costs get too high. But when we're talking about, I think we've all been becoming really familiar with the impacts that data centers have on communities, especially AI data centers and crypto data centers. When you start talking about combining nuclear power plants with that, the environmental impacts, start to amplify really dramatically. So, the largest data centers that are in operation and being planned today are in the 100 to 650 megawatt side, which is a huge power demand. It's massive. And the amount of growth in that sector is also really huge, projected to be 50 gigawatts of additional data centers by 2030, maybe up to 80 gigawatts by 2035. Nuclear reactors, whether it's an SMR or a large reactor, generate between 300 and 1100 megawatts. So you'd be talking about building hundreds of nuclear plants to meet any significant portion of those new loads. Which again, no construction is happening now. It would have to ramp up, incredibly fast to do any of that. In fact, it takes 3 to 4 years to build an AI data center, whereas, it takes about 12 to 17 years to plan and build a nuclear power plant. And then in terms of water consumption, I think we're aware that data centers, especially AI data centers, consume a tremendous amount of water, mostly for cooling. And so that is on average about 550,000 gallons of water withdrawn from like a river or an aquifer. They lose about 440,000 of that to evaporation. A large reactor, or reactors of basically any size are many times more water than that. So if you're going to build SMRs or a large reactor to power your big AI data center, you're talking about much more significant impacts on the water resource as well. Next slide. Now, these are just some slides that are, sort of basics on, nuclear energy and the environmental impacts of nuclear energy. And so I'm going to stop here for question and answers. And then these slides will be available with the slide deck so you can get the other part of the story.
Great. Thank you, Tim. That was really informative and a lot of good numbers there to digest and understand. I appreciate your insight on that. We do have a couple questions that came in. Nuclear is expensive to build, but Calvert Cliffs is generating a huge amount of energy on a very small footprint. What is the cost per kilowatt of hour for a plant like Calvert Cliffs compared to a LNG plant, especially if you factor in the costs, both health and environmental, of CO2 generated by these other sources?
Well, I think it's hard to sort of calculate in the cost of CO2. There's not really a mechanism to do that. But I think we don't really know what the cost of operating Calvert Cliffs is. Now, Constellation has said a number of times in recent years that it deserves a subsidy, right, in order to cover its costs and to ensure that it continues operating. So I think what we're looking at is average costs of reactors are going up as they get older. But the industry doesn't provide any actual figures that are really transparent or reliable about their costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes it hard to understand there. Do you have concerns that NRC has become a captured agency and the Trump administration will be putting pressure for fast approval before safety measures are assured?
So the NRC, most of the environmental movement has been really, really critical of the NRC for a long time. They've been a captive agency for decades. But what the administration has done in the last year has essentially sort of really gone past any sort of limit of reason. The NRC has been doged just like all these other federal agencies have. So this directive to the NRC to complete licensing of new reactors within 18 months. It's not clear that you can do an adequate technical safety review of a new reactor that's never been built before in 18 months. but that's the expectation that's put on the NRC now, and to do it with much fewer staff. And so what we're seeing at the same time is these directives are being put on NRC to expedite licensing approvals, is that the staff has been cut and the staff available to do inspections of reactors, right, which are essentially how a lot of the promotion of nuclear energy has relied on the idea that we have a strong regulator who's doing inspections and ensuring that reactors are safe. There can be no expectation of that.
Yeah, that actually leads into another question here. So thinking about extending the life of old nuclear power plants and the risks that those that brings, does Maryland have the authority to inspect these power plants, these old ones? How do we change that?
You can't. I mean, this is an area that's essentially preempted by the Atomic Energy Act, which gives the federal government, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the sole authority to regulate the safety of reactors. So there have been states that have sort of intervened to to try to sort of affect the operations of reactors. Those have had limited success, but there is no direct regulatory role the state can provide over nuclear safety.
That's unfortunate to hear. Question about the PSC. So why do they allow pricing to be a secret? And to further that, how can we hold the PSC accountable? It seems as if that when the PSC reviews costs, it seems too high level, not a line item. And so there's no way to judge the cost efficiency or areas for improvement beyond looking at total costs. Is there a way to address this?
Well, I think greater transparency, is really important. I think the problem that they probably looked at with, and when they wrote the Next Gen Act, is if the PSC says what its cost limit is, then it could be controversial because maybe the public thinks it's too high. And then there'd be pressure on the PSC to basically not do what the act requires, which is to approve a project. But the other thing is that it might also basically sort of rig the bidding that companies do when they propose their project's cost. If they knew how much was too much, then they might just propose something that's lower than that, even though they know it's going to cost more.
Yeah. Okay, another question here about the waste from nuclear power plants. Do nuclear power plants generate different grades of waste that might require different levels of safeguards in the disposal?
Well, there are different classifications for radioactive waste. So when I talked about the 1,700 tons of irradiated fuel that's stored, that's called high-level radioactive waste. That's the most intensely radioactive waste that's generated. But there's a wide stream of different other radioactive waste that the plants produce. Some of which they release directly into the bay and into the air. Some of which they ship off-site for disposal. These are typically called low-level radioactive waste, but it's not necessarily low levels of radioactivity. It's just lower than the highest stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that wraps up our question portion here, Tim, of everything that came through. I'd encourage you to put your contact or your website in the chat for the attendees.
Yeah, if you go to the last slide too, it's there as well.
Yeah. Do you have a couple more slides here? Did you want to leave these for the viewers to look at on the recorder?
Sure. Yeah. So this is just sort of an overview of the way the nuclear fuel chain. This is the nuclear fuel chain is similar to the fossil fuel chain. They don't just put uranium into a reactor. It's a long process of extraction that produces a ton of other radioactive waste. And so that's why we call it the uranium fuel chain. It goes from mining uranium in the ground to making it into fuel to what happens when the reactor shuts down. If you go to the next slide, this is what that looks like. In uranium mining, they produce a tremendous amount of radioactive waste from pulling the uranium out. Essentially, what you end up with is 5,000 pounds of radioactive waste just from the mining for every pound of fuel that goes into a reactor. And mostly that is dumped at the mining site. And so this is mostly on indigenous land. And so we have 15,000 abandoned uranium mines in the US, which are essentially, just left there and have never been cleaned up. Yeah. Then you have to refine and mill the uranium. It's enriched to make it fissile for the reactor. And that creates a whole other stream of what's called depleted uranium that is several times more than the fuel that comes out. And then they fabricate it into fuel, which is those communities are contaminated as well. Mm-hmm. And the next slide. And then you sort of go to the back end, which is, the fuel goes to the reactor, it's put into the reactor. It becomes intensely radioactive by the splitting of the atoms in the fission process, produces a lot of other radioactive waste. It's also released into the environment. There was just a study by the Harvard School of Public Health that was published last month that looked at the cancer rates within proximity to nuclear reactors, and found that there's a significant correlation between people who live within 25 to 30 kilometers of a reactor and the cancer rates. And they tested that against other possible factors and found that it was probably related to the emissions from the reactor. Then when the reactor shuts down, essentially the entire plant becomes radioactive waste and has to be decommissioned and remediated. That is expensive itself, usually costs more than $1 billion per reactor. And then you're left with the irradiated fuel, which, there is no repository program in operation in the US to build a permanent repository for this waste. And so it's going to be sitting, at Calvert Cliffs and at other reactor sites pretty much indefinitely. And I think a significant issue to consider with new reactors is who's going to bear the cost of that storage. Because, under a sort of a bad policy decision made in the 1990s, the federal government is basically reimbursing the industry for most of their costs for storing the waste that the existing reactors are producing. But new reactors aren't going to benefit from that policy. And so, as you'd be looking at decades of storing nuclear waste, maybe centuries of storing nuclear waste at reactor sites or data centers or wherever, who's going to pay the cost of that?
That's a good question. Yeah, and your last slide here to close it out.
Yeah, so this is sort of leading you to the conclusion that we have come to, which is that nuclear power is too dirty, too dangerous, too expensive, and too slow to be a reasonable sort of energy solution for the climate crisis. And that's also because it's rooted in environmental justice and human rights violations. All those radioactive waste that I talked about, impact, communities like indigenous communities and other communities of color. And you have the intergenerational harm for this waste that has no solution.
Right. Well, Tim, I just want to thank you. I learned an incredible amount here on nuclear and the ins and outs of it. And again, to the audience, these slides will be available later next week up on the Maryland Legislative Coalition's website, along with the recording today. And I'll just say thank you, Tim, for joining us, and really thank to all the speakers for today. That's a wrap on day one of the 7th Annual Legislative Summit on Climate and the Environment. I'll say what a jam-packed day of insight from our legislators, our advocates, agency representatives. We really, truly appreciate your time and engagement today. Before you go, I do want to hit you with a few reminders. On the right-hand side here, scan this code over here to take the survey. That helps us, adjust this program to the best we can to meet the needs of the attendees here. And then join us for tomorrow. So the same link that you have today will work for tomorrow. But if you want to see the agenda, scan this QR code on the left here, and that'll get you for the topic for tomorrow. And speaking of tomorrow, I'm going to tell you, you won't want to miss it. We have over 15 legislators speaking on 20 some odd pieces of legislation. We'll do a deep dive into the environmental and water quality portion of this program. And we're going to start off with 2 keynote speakers, one touching on the Conowingo Dam relicensing agreement and lessons learned there, and another one on the deep dive of PFAS, those forever chemicals that are affecting our communities everywhere. Also a special feature for tomorrow, in addition to the legislators that will be talking, we also have 3 agencies joining us. We'll have Secretary Addix from MDA, Maryland Department of Agriculture. We'll have Secretary McElwain from Maryland Department of the Environment, and then we'll also have the Department of Natural Resources joining us as well. And then to close out the day, I'm really excited about this as well. We'll have the esteemed former senator and Maryland Energy Administrator Director, Paul Pinsky, who many of us who've worked on legislation in Maryland has worked with for years and years. And so we're really excited to hear from him on some words of wisdom and guidance for Marylanders as we head into the legislative session and really for the future of our climate work moving forward. And so I'll tell you, after today, I'm feeling educated, inspired, and ready for another full day tomorrow. I'll come back, and I hope you all do too. Remember, the link from today will work for tomorrow. So Please get some rest and let's get right back at it tomorrow. And again, thank you to all the sponsoring organizations today. And thank you all for joining us. It's really a pleasure of mine to be here. So signing out from the Eastern Shore, where I think the rain has finally stopped. Let's get back at it tomorrow. We'll see you then, everybody. Thank you so much.